2023 makes a decade since the commencement of Section 1 of the Act. The Act has witnessed a decade of evolution, adaptability, and progress. The Companies Act 2013 has been instrumental in reshaping India's corporate landscape. It introduced groundbreaking reforms that have amplified corporate governance, transparency, accountability, the ease of doing business, and a shift towards responsible business practices. Our webinar today is not just a commemoration. Its objective is to generate forward-looking insights. The very essence of our discussion is to provide ideas for future reforms. These reforms will include new ideas and concepts as well as vital changes needed to existing provisions. Friends, our esteemed panelists, I'm thankful. They are numbering over 25, comprising of distinguished experts in company law. They include company secretary and CFO of leading companies, practicing chartered accountant and practicing company secretaries, proxy advisors, and corporate lawyers. They being a wealth of hands-on practical experience with them. Our agenda today connect with the spirit of aspirational India as our nation strides towards self-sufficiency, technology leadership, and economic resilience. Our corporate framework must mirror these ambitions. We confront new challenges posed by advancements such as digital tokens, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, companies with variable share capital, green bonds, ESG focus, SPEC, alongside the uneased quest for ease of doing business. The research carried out by the team, corporate professional, as well as all suggestions received today from our panelists, as well as participants, will be collated and conveyed to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs for your consideration, madam. Knowledge sharing is a part of CP DNA. Our journey of webinar started in April 2020, and since then we have been consistently and persistently organizing free webinar for every Friday 4 to 6 on diverse topics. We are proud to a massive response for our webinar received with over 1 lakh professionals registering for 142 webinar. This is 143rd webinar today held so far. From policymaker to industry leader, leading professional and industry, as well as a practicing professional from various specialization from all across India and abroad, generously supported our efforts and contributed their time and wisdom. Friends, we have also been regularly sharing suggestions and feedback with the government and regulator on various issues, as well as creating knowledge repository in the form of FAQs and video in public domain. It is also a part of DNA of CP that in the quest of consistent support in various endeavor or improved law, we have suggested various things to MCA. First, we gave a portal, suggestion portal to MCA, and we made a software where we asked the suggestion on draft rules when the Companies Act came in 2013. We collected over 80,000 suggestions, comments, and screened all suggestions and removed duplicacy and comments and suggested in a format. Arrange 80,000 suggestion topic-wise, section-wise within period of 2 weeks and submitted to Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Then this law, they have finalized the rules. Then after that, on Company Law Committee, we have given in 2016 the same software and same help. 14,000 suggestions came. Draft insolvency, 10,000 plus suggestion came. Draft amendment in completion law, 10,000 suggestions came. And draft amendment in CSR law, 4,000. And draft amendment in incorporation law, 4,000. All these things we have given to ministry on through the portal. I was a member of the rule-making committee in 2013, and my team has supported me. The CP has organized 30 webinars till today in this knowledge sharing, and is 30 webinar. We have done various webinar on in the 3 years. And these webinars which we have done on corporate social responsibility, M&A, MCA 21, reforms in company law, LLP, and discussion on company law committee. And these things has created and various ideas and various suggestions which we have submitted to Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and as well as their team and the joint secretaries have also was the part of this webinar. And the most important thing, then we came out the merger and amalgamations booklet for the help of ministry, because the government companies M&A is not going to NCLT, it is going to ministry. And we circulated free copies to all senior officials to MCA and CMD and key executive personnel for Central PSU for making this. CP came out with publication on Companies Act, first book in 2013. It has come out 16 edition, which we'll release today. Company law procedure we have given, company law ready referencer is there, business valuation, and the insolvency book, which we came out after this. When the Companies Act 2013 came, we launched our website Companies Act, and we gave free of access to everybody. For a special thing, there was a charge, but normal things were there. And then we came out with the app also. Today, we are taking some initiative. We are issuing a fact sheet of 10 years of Companies Act 2013. We have done survey on impact of Companies Act 2013 at a decade of transformation will be released today, and launching of latest publication on Companies Act 2013. These things we will do today. And this engagement with MCA will be continue. We are planning to come out with a compendium of article by all our dignitaries, which is participating today, our panelists, compilation of reformatic change and future reforms that we will come after collating today's program. We will come out with a booklet. Then we will carry out continuously polls and survey for giving the feedback, continuously bring out quality publication, and then continuous knowledge sharing by webinar and mailer that we will continue. So friends, this is our plan for doing for future for doing this work. As we stand on the threshold of enlightening journey, I humbled to introduce our chief guest and guest of honor. Friends, we have Ms. Anuradha Thakur, Additional Secretary MC and Director SFIU as a chief guest. She is the outstanding bureaucrat currently looking after administration and implementation of Companies Act 2013. In addition, she is also supervised the Indian Corporate Law Services and various other aspects. As a Director SFIO, she looks after all the work relating to investigation and prosecution. Before joining MCA, she worked as the Additional Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat. I welcome you, Madam, and your participation will definitely encourage and motivate us to do something more. Then I welcome our guest of honor. He is none other Mr. N. Damodaran. He is founder and chairperson of Excellence Enabler and ex-chairman SEBI. Sri Damodaran ji is a widely acknowledged as one of the India's foremost champion of corporate governance. He is presently an independent consultant and sits on the board of the several reputed company. He is the founder chairman of Institute of IIM Tiruchirappalli. As member of IAS, he has held several important positions, including as a chief secretary of Tripura, chairman UTI, chairman IDBI, chairman Emerging Market Committee of International Organization of Securities Commission. He also been continue to be the chairman of several government and RBI committee. I welcome you, sir, for this program, and your participation will give the flying colors to our program. So on behalf of corporate professional, distinguished panelists, participants, and on my own behalf, I once again extend a very warm welcome to our chief guest and guest of honor. Before proceeding, I now wish to invite Ankit Singhi, Head Corporate Affairs, Corporate Professional, to arrange release of CP publication fact sheet on Decade of Companies at 2013 and survey. Over to you, Ankit.
Thank you, sir, and good evening to everyone. This is a momentous occasion for all of us. So I'll request Anuradha ma'am to release our latest publication on Companies Act by just clicking a button.
Okay, what button do I have to press?
To just give you consent for the release.
Madam, you have book.
Yeah.
You have a book, you can just show, madam.
Yes, I can show the book. That's what I had done.
That's right.
This is the latest edition and the bestseller of corporate professionals.
Yeah, and the thicker version also, both.
Yeah, so I think more than 20,000 copies have been sold so far of this book. And it's a very unique book in terms of updated very recently till August. Have references to all exemption notifications. Important point is all sections have a reference to the relevant rule. So you can just by going to the section, get a link or reference to the relevant rule among us, the rules that are given as part of the book, and you can have a very easy cross reference of the relevant section and the relevant book, and ease of reading, because most of the sections in the Companies Act have to be read by the relevant rules. So in that sense, this is a very unique book. Also consists of the secretarial standards issued by the ICSI and some other references that we have included as part of the knowledge sharing in the book. So thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. As this is a special occasion, so we also thought to create something different. So we have created a small booklet. It's a e-booklet, which is a fact sheet on Companies Act. So how Companies Act have progressed over these last 10 years in terms of the journey, in structure, and everything. So it's a small book. We thought it's a good occasion to use it to just it would be going back into the memory lane to understand how far the Companies Act has traveled during the course of the last 10 years. Mr. Damodaran, if you're with your consent, I'll release this book.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll just just give reference in terms of what this book is. Just give me a second. Shivam, can you put that book on? I think I'm not able to share that from me. So this book is consists of journey of the Companies Act, structure of the Companies Act, how the amendment journey of the Companies Act, how it has gone through during the whole all these years. Some key facts in terms of what are the sections which have been amended most, sections which have been amended least. There are some sections which are still to be enforced after 10 years, some important small provisions under the Companies Act, and then the circulars that have been issued, the years which have seen highest number of circulars. Then in terms of statutory authorities or what all compasses under the Companies Act, NFRA, IPF, the Registrar of Companies, the CPACE, a lot of different institutions that have come across under the Act, and punishments, the journey in terms of what all the schemes, what all FAQs have been issued under the Act. So it gives you a good reference point for having just to, if you want to understand how Companies Act has traveled over the years. So it's just a good reference point for you to have handy with you. I hope it will serve the purpose of all readers and they'll find it useful. So we, apart from this fact sheet, we have also undertaken a small survey where we have asked some relevant questions on the Companies Act in terms of historical performance and what they foresee in the times to come. So we'll also just put that survey across, just give you small highlights of what we have captured from various users. Shivam, if you can put that survey on the slide. So, okay. So, whether the Companies Act has in the current state a significant transformational shift. So 50% of our respondents said yes, there is a significant transformational shift since the erstwhile 1956 Act until date. That's a good response that we see from a lot of the respondents. In terms of the roles of the professionals, whether it has enhanced post enactment of Companies Act, more than majority of say yes, it has increased significantly. Then whether it leads to better governance, compliance, there has been significant response from the respondents in terms of yes, it has contributed significantly to the governance, compliance, and reporting. In terms of future announcements, what they see, so whether the compliance ecosystem needs to revamp basis the size operations of the company. So like there is a small company, whether small companies should have a relaxed ecosystem as opposed to other companies. So significant number of respondents said yes, more than significant, that we feel that there is a need. Then on decriminalization offenses, which have been a very flag bearer, where the ministry is acting as a flag bearer in last couple of years, still we see people see that there is a need of further decriminalization of offenses. So we'll create a list in terms of where they have received suggestions on penal provisions, where still there is a chance. On provisions which we like to see in Companies Act, so we asked in terms of fractional ownership, allowing SPACs, allowing listed entities. There were different feedback that we have received. In terms of overall compliance burden, whether that has increased or not, 52% has said that has increased under the Companies Act to some extent on some businesses. So that is something which we give our suggestions on how we can reduce the overall compliance burden. Impactful provisions and technology. So which were the sections which have most impact? So majority of respondents said on corporate social responsibility, then rotation of auditor, appointment of independent directors, even setting up of an NCLT. These are some of the key impactful provisions that the new Companies Act introduced. Even secretarial audit and adjudication of penalties, that has also received good response in terms of the key areas. Sections, do you believe will make significant impact in future? Though class action should have rarely been used since its introduction under the new acts, but people still see it as something which will be used in the coming times. Then cross-border merger is something which Corporate Inc. is also looking with great interest as to once the rules and transactions are there. Technology reliance is 82% feel we will be having more technology in order to use to manage and ensure compliance in the Companies Act in the coming years. And with AI and other evolution coming like ChatGPT, there will definitely be much more reliance on technology as opposed to what we are using currently in terms of ensuring compliances under the Companies Act. So that was a little survey that we did. We'll share the findings with all the participants. And thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'll give the mic to you.
Okay. Thanks, Ankit. Now I will request our guest of honor, Damodaran sir, to tell us about his experience, and his word of wisdom is always useful for all professional and in the corporate world. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pawan. Firstly, thank you for having me as a part of this program. I know that I indicated to you I have a hard exit at 4:30, and you said, nevertheless, I will be fitted into the program. So thank you very much. I think you and your colleagues are doing outstanding work in promoting education, because having good laws is not enough. It's important to help people to understand the law so that their actions are on the right side of the law and do not add to the regulatory and the enforcement burdens. The 2013 Act is clearly far more relevant to our times than the 1956 Act ever could have been. In that sense, it's a very significant improvement. But it took 57 years for the 1956 Act to become a part of history. I hope we don't wait for another 57 years, because the world is changing rapidly. Changes in the corporate environment are very rapid, and therefore we need to have laws and regulations that are of contemporary relevance rather than of historical value. The second big point that I want to make is that laws are a means to an end. Laws are not an end in itself. We got to have clarity about what that end is. And that end clearly is, how can you facilitate legitimate conduct of business while coming down heavily and quickly on those that are stepping out of line? So the major objective is, how do you create an environment in which the laws and regulations make it easy for good, honest businessmen to carry on business without having too many obstacles or hurdles erected in the way? And that is the philosophy that ought to inform lawmaking. That is the philosophy that ought to guide persons who are in the business of not just enacting laws or writing regulations, but even implementing them. Because if you don't have the right mindset, you will end up penalizing the wrong guys and allowing the other persons to get away, those that need to be punished. I'll touch on a few things which I think are positive. First is, I think, the decriminalization of minor offenses. That's a huge positive. There's been an area of concern for many, many years post the coming into force of the Act, that every minor transgression was treated as a criminal offense, attracting penal consequences. Significant ground has been covered in that space, but I would imagine that there is a lot more that can be done if we look at this not as a criminal law, but substantially a civil law to facilitate the conduct of business. So that is something that needs to be done. At the same time, repeated defaulters will be visited with heavier penalties, and that is a very welcome provision. The definition of the small company as well as the introduction of the LLPs, I think, positive, because these have been around for a while but needed to have a kind of legal recognition. Gender diversity in the boardrooms is good. Have we traveled far enough? No. Diversity is not gender diversity, and we need to look at other forms of diversity to see that the board does not become, while it is a seat of wisdom, it does not become a meeting place for old people, some of whom might have lost contact with contemporary realities. And therefore, you need age diversity, you need geographical diversity, you need several other diversities, not just diversity on the basis of gender. Auditor rotation, again, is a very welcome provision. I've been advocating this, I think, since the mid-90s, and I thought cozy relationships had developed between auditors and audited entities, and therefore the ability to tell the truth like it is, which tends to get in some sense blunted over time by continuing the same auditor, is a matter that has been addressed. Have we traveled far enough? Is 5 + 5 good? Because 10 years is a long time. I know the usual arguments will be trotted out about domain familiarity, understanding the company, having the bandwidth. Not too many audit firms have the bandwidth, all of that. I think we can work around all of that to see that you get a little faster rotation in auditors and not 5 + 5, 10 years. NCLT is a good provision, but somehow the intentions are honorable. Is it working out the way it was intended to work out? I think the jury is still out on that. And anyone who says it's doing a great job is clearly making a statement that is politically right and not factually consistent with what we get to see. The big misses. NFRA, again, is a very good inclusion, largely because it was felt that a business body cannot be a regulator, cannot be enforcing conduct rules among its members, because there is some kind of a conflict of interest. No matter how you compose a disciplinary committee, there is a conflict of interest that will remain if the body that represents the business interests is also the body that is tasked with regulation, and therefore NFRA, I think, is a very good addition. Early days yet to see how it will play out. I'm not one of those who believe that regulatory organizations should be judged in a few years. You should look at 10, 15 years to see whether they have stood the test of time. Now, the major misses, according to me, I think it was a huge omission in the 2013 Act not to include the Risk Management Committee as a mandatory committee. You didn't have to wait for SEBI to bring it into being through the LODR, because today it is at least as important as the other four which are mandated by the Companies Act. And therefore, whenever a change takes place, I think it's useful to bring the RMC into legislation rather than keep it in the regulations of SEBI. Provisions on RPT have been changing so rapidly. Some amount of synchronization needs to be worked out so that those that do not have the right intentions do not go in for regulatory arbitrage, looking at whether the Companies Act has the lighter provisions or SEBI has, and then trying to take advantage. So there should be an ongoing attempt, and firstly an ongoing conversation to see that as far as the listed entities are concerned, there is no major difference between the Companies Act and the SEBI LODR. Then I come to CSR, which is the last point. I'm conscious of time. CSR, when it was introduced, we were told was a comply or explain provision. This concept was imported from the United Kingdom, where because you had enlightened shareholders that would ask the right questions. It was believed that a company not measuring up should be able to bring a satisfactory explanation to the AGM so that shareholders are able to sit in judgment on that. We introduced Corex only for CSR in the Companies Act 2013. But what has happened since then worries me a little. It became comply or explain. After that became comply or explain to the government and the regulators, who started issuing letters on why haven't you measured up to 2%? Why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? I think the time has come to go back to the origins of Corex, comply or explain to shareholders and other stakeholders, and government should prescribe what goes into CSR and then step back rather than looking at, is it 2%, is it 1.5%? Do you need to create a separate fund for that so that the unspent amount is spent next year? But these are areas which I think the government can stay out of. Two last points. One, the entire law, and just not the Companies Act, but all laws have over time been premised on the fact that businessmen cannot be trusted. I think it's important, follow the principle, trust but verify, rather than distrust and crucify, which seems to be holding the ground at this point of time. Your survey indicated, the first slide of your survey, that 41% of the respondents felt that they were not entirely happy with what the Companies Act. It's true that the majority felt it was good, but if 41% are dissatisfied, I think there is a need for a meaningful consultative exercise to see where that dissatisfaction resides and how to address it. My very last point, laws and regulations, I believe there's an article of faith with me, must be written in simple language. Can we revisit some of those provisions? My favorite example is the definition of fraud in the explanation to section 447. I think it should be written in 6 simple sentences rather than the complicated sentence in which it is written. I'm out of time. I have reminders for my next meeting. Thank you, Pawan, for the opportunity. But to sum up, Companies Act is good legislation. In parts, it makes the 1956 Act better. There's no doubt about that in some parts, but too few parts. But there is a lot of work to be done. Legislate in haste and regret at leisure is not such a good idea. So, which happened with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US. Legislated very quickly and then went back and repented at leisure. We need to revisit some of the provisions so that contemporary relevance is ensured on a continuing basis without erecting unnecessary obstacles in the way of people that want to do business legitimately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Damodaran sir, for your insightful and thought-provoking address, and your suggestions and point of view is really music to the ears. And I'm grateful that despite of your other engagement, you have come. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me to leave, right?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Now it is my privilege now to invite our chief guest, Ms. Anuradha Thakur, to deliver her inaugural address.
Thank you so much, Pawan. As always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you in one of your webinars. This time on a very important topic, like you rightly pointed out, where we as government get an occasion, albeit brief, to reflect upon the progress made and to also reflect upon, as Mr. Damodaran rightly pointed out and rightly termed, the misses. So that gives us an occasion to think whether we can do more and in what direction we can do more. I am extremely astonished, happily, to note the number of people who have participated, like you told me, and who are participating in the webinar. That gives me a lot of satisfaction about the kind of interest and the kind of involvement our professionals and others have with the work of the government. 10 years of the Companies Act is indeed a momentous occasion, as you said. I would very much welcome, like you promised right at the outset, to not only get the document of the summary of all the discussions, but also to have occasion to discuss with you all and with whatever professionals are interested, whoever is interested to discuss with us about the improvements that we can make. We can say with certain amount of satisfaction from the government side that one thing that has been the touchstone of our legislations, particularly in MCA, is the degree of consultation that we try to do. We may succeed in getting a lot of views, which we mostly do also, and you pointed out how the corporate professionals have partnered with the government in helping us get views and comments, vast amount of views and comments at every stage. That we have amended the Act 4 times from the ministry side in a decade, to me points to the fact that to begin with, it was a law that was probably made as a good response 10 years back, and it was dynamic and live enough. And also the government was flexible enough to listen to the feedback of the professionals as well as other stakeholders in the ecosystem and respond to it in good measure. I have been told when I was discussing it with my officers here that at every step, each of the 4 times that we amended, we put it out in the public space to get views. We almost always have had a corporate law committee, which has participation from various stakeholders, and the chambers as well as the professionals contribute to enriching our discussions to take forward the law so that it addresses the business environment of the time. I'm happy to note what Mr. Damodaran said, and I wish that I had come in at the end so that I could have had the benefit of listening to all the comments. But unfortunately, time is short for us on a working day like this. I must say that maybe it is time for me also to set the context about what was the main intention of the company law, what we thought we wanted to do. And one of the few things that 4 or 5 pointers that I would like to lay down on the table is that one thing that we tried to do perhaps successfully was that most of the existing business formats have been recognized in the Act, either 10 years back or going forward in the amendments. Apart from that, for example, one-person companies, that space was opened up in the Companies Act. And I was just going through and glancing through the annual reports. I was happy to note that about 43,000 one-person companies are in existence today. Similarly, the space for dormant companies, that was provided with a view to facilitating ease of doing business so that you don't necessarily have to close business and restart, but you can keep it dormant with minimal compliance requirements. Like Mr. Damodaran pointed out about compliance burden, and I was a bit quizzical about seeing the survey where people have felt that more reduction and rationalization of compliances needs to be done. Some of it has been recommended by the latest CLC, which has gone into the further amendments which are required. A large number of sections have been decriminalized, and we are looking forward to considering some more sections which can be decriminalized for ease of doing business. The whole approach of government in the last few years has been a trust-based approach, whether it is to do with filings, where we rely completely upon the corporates to do the filings as per the requirements of the law and regulations, or whether it is with the decriminalization approach, whether the approach is about facilitating business, facilitating legitimate conduct of business, and also coming down harshly on the wrongdoers and people who are out there to commit fraud. In that vein, I must say that in the implementation of the Act, which is something that I oversee in the ministry, it has been a challenge, and it has also been a challenge that we feel as a ministry and as officers of the ministry, we are trying to reach out to, is to respond to the large pendency of cases. Once I had had occasion to interact with professionals in my role as director SFIO, and our aim is to close cases which are long pending, because the more delay we make in closing investigations, the less and less relevance it has for meeting out not only the individual complaint or case on hand, but also the demonstrative effect that it is supposed to have as per the provisions of the Act. As has been pointed out, one of the in the survey was of great interest to me, although it came very fast and went off very fast. Some of the important provisions that I saw, which people also felt, and people in this case are highly qualified professionals, which have had impact, are, for example, rotation of auditors, or the diversification of the board, or the fact that independent directors have been mandatorily placed and women directors have also been placed. Now, UN Women reached out to us some time back to see the impact of having women as directors on the board. And I also suggested to them that why don't you suggest certain indicators? And as can be seen, while there may or may not be direct impact of these things, professionals, I would like you all to point out to us what has been the indirect benefit of having a diverse board. That would be of interest to see in the light of creating a business environment in which everyone feels included, in which professionals who want to deliver professional services feel that they are being valued, and which businesses feel enthusiastic enough to contribute to the economy, because finally, boost to the economy, job creation, we know and we recognize the largest part of it probably has to come from the private sector, and the push is coming from the private sector. We in the ministry would like to partner with that and not be a step behind. We would like to be a step forward so that we can not only handhold, we can actually pull forward those businesses, those youngsters who want to be contributing to the country, to the economy. And in that light, I really welcome the seminar today. I will not take any more time. I just wanted to set the tone and give you the message of the ministry. Like I said, we not only want to be partners, we would like to get suggestions how we can make the law better, how we can sharpen the regulations, so that we are completely in tandem with the spirit of the times, which is, like Sir Damodaran sir rightly said, facilitate legitimate conduct of business and have a harsh punishment for the wrongdoers, particularly the intentional wrongdoers. Because I feel both ends are equally important to push forward good corporate governance, good corporate behavior, which can eventually contribute to the economy and to the country. With that, I may again thank Mr. Pavan Vijay for inviting me, for having me over. And I am so grateful that all of you all are here today to put your comments forward, finally, so that we can imbibe it and make strides ahead for improving the law, which can then take forward the country. Thank you so much, Mr. Vijay. Thank you so much, all the participants and all esteemed members of the corporate professionals. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, madam. Thank you for your insightful and informative, and the most important, encouraging in that sense that the regulator is changing. That is the one message I got, that they want to invite the professional, they want to discuss, they want to make the law, and they want to implement after discussing with their stakeholders. It's a good sign. India is progressing. Today we saw the GDP is growing. So, and we are going to Atmanirbhar. So I think this is a good Amrit Kal that everybody is changing. And that's the best part. And I think you have rightly pointed out that we should support the legitimate business and we should be harsh on the people, those who are doing wrongdoing. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. And I'll request, as much as you can stay and you can join late also, because we have this program on 7 o'clock. So thank you for your and Damodaran sir for giving a tone of this program. Thank you.
I will be on listening mode because I have to do my own work in my room for some time. So I will certainly be on listening mode.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me one more time.
Okay, thank you, madam, thank you. Okay, now it's a time for our session. Friends, I'll just tell you, all the panelists, they have worked very hard and we have planned very meticulously. So I'll just tell you that we have listed out 11 topics under which we will hold deliberations. At the beginning of discussion for each topic, we will introduce our distinguished panelists by this way, and then take you through transformative reforms made in their area during the last decade. Followed by that, each distinguished panelist will make his or her presentation on the future reforms that may be required in the form of a speech. So my 2-3 request is there, so we can get, because you have seen the mood of regulator that they want suggestions. Now it's our time that in place of talking about the past, which has taken place, we must focus on future, that what is missing. And everybody is concerned about the missing part, and that is a main point. So that's why whatever development has taken place, that we will I will just jot down, and then we will come out that you give your maximum 5, minimum you can give any number, suggestions, and we have requested all the dignitaries, they have divided their topics and they have worked out. So friends, first we are starting corporate governance. And in corporate governance, we have Rajendra Singhi, Geetika Anand, Parvati Sam, S. Sudhakar and G.N. Gupta. And in this program, in this session, we will cover sustainability, board composition, board process, ID, EGM, vigilance mechanism, board evolution. But in the past, we have seen there's so many changes has taken place. Independent director, holding of the audit committee, separate CEO and chairperson role, board diversity, enhanced shareholders role, whistleblower protection, increased disclosure, e-voting, general meeting through VC, and rotation and auditor, independent director. That has taken place. Now come to that what is future. So I will start, Rajendra, that you start, and then Geetika, Parvati, Sam, Sudhakar and Gupta sir, they can discuss. So over to you, Rajendra. And my again request to all my participants that they should just focus on the main point of communication. So it will be, we can collect as many as new suggestions, which we will give it to the ministry. Over to you, Rajendra.
Thank you. Thank you. So good evening to all the participants and my co-panelists and Ms. Chief Guest, Ms. Anuradha Thakur. At the outset, I'd like to thank Mr. Vijay for inviting me for this webinar. The theme for today's webinar, Companies Act 2013, a decade of transformation, has been chosen very aptly by a corporate professional, and I must compliment them. No doubt, Companies Act have brought about many path-breaking and revolutionary changes towards enhancing governance, transparency, and accountability in the corporate world. I would not like to get into details of this, since which you all are aware of the changes. Of course, time has now come to reflect and identify what further changes can be made toward enhancing ease of doing business while ensuring good governance and transparency coupled with accountability. It is in this context, while many possible changes I have in my mind, but I'll restrict to listing out few of them, which in my view, will further promote the intended objective of the Act, which is good governance. So top of on my mind is our sustainability framework. Now, Companies Act is completely silent on this sustainability reporting, related frameworks, etc. It is important in today's context that stakeholders should know the progress, what companies are making on sustainability platform, and how they are fulfilling their obligation toward ESG, that is environmental, social, and governance. Sustainability reporting also provides an opportunity to businesses to communicate with the stakeholders on such ESG reporting in an open and transparent manner. While we all know listed companies annually prepare a business responsibility and sustainability report based on 9 principles out by Ministry of Corporate Affairs under the National Guidelines of Responsible Business Conduct. And the company makes where company makes performance disclosure under these principles with respect to governance, leadership, environment, emission target, value chain, customers, and so on and so forth. However, in the absence of any requirement under the Companies Act, there are very large unlisted companies are there, and they are out of the purview of this mandatory obligation with respect to sustainability reporting. So in my view, something on sustainability needs to come into the Companies Act. My second point on the list is the risk management, which Mr. Damodaran has also alluded to. Management of risk has become very important aspects in handling the affairs of the company. For listed companies, there are adequate regulations for management of risk. However, Companies Act does not contain any specific requirement with respect to risk management, besides asking a statement in the board reports inter alia which says in the opinion about any risk which may threaten the existence of the company. In my view, every company should undertake risk assessment on an annual basis and review the mitigation plans for the same. Considering the importance of this aspect, the Act should specifically contain regulatory provision with respect to risk management and formation of a committee like risk management committee, which Mr. Damodaran has also advocated. My third point on the list is governance of subsidiary companies. The corporate world has moved towards group structures and consolidated financials. Presently, Companies Act does not contain any specific requirement with respect to governance of subsidiary company. As a next step, the Act should also lay down certain governance requirements relating to subsidiary company, somewhat similar to Regulation 24 of SEBI listing regulations. Adequate provisions may be introduced in the Companies Act, differentiating between material subsidiaries and other subsidiaries. Significant transaction or investment of subsidiaries or business performance of the company should be reviewed by the holding company. Since the financials of subsidiaries are consolidated in the holding company and the performance of and governance of any subsidiary have impact on the holding company, it is necessary that there should be adequate framework in the Companies Act for governance of subsidiaries. On my list, the next point is on general meetings. Presently, MC has permitted us holding the general meeting by circulars from time to time to hold AGM through electronic mode, and such a deadline is now till 31st December 2023. We are all used to virtual shareholders meeting thanks to COVID over the last 3-4 years or so. This is indeed a welcome change and far more efficient mechanism of conducting such meetings, wherein shareholders from across the globe can participate in the meeting and express their views. This new way of conducting general meeting also promotes ease of doing business in as much as it involves lesser administrative hassle for companies. However, government extends the benefit to conduct general meeting through the mode on a yearly basis. Time has now come to make this a permanent provision in the Companies Act. My last point on the list is secretarial standards. As we all know, the Companies Act has mandated the companies to observe secretarial standards with respect to general meetings and the board meetings, formulated by the Institute of Company Secretaries of India and approved by the Government of India. Approved by the Ministry. The standard lays down, as we all know, the standard lays down standardized processes and mechanisms for corporates to comply with applicable laws and provide clarity on implementation aspect, thereby assisting companies to achieve better compliance. There are many other areas like dividend, related party transactions, where due to lack of defined processes and systems, companies are following different practices towards and approaches towards implementation of same. Although ICSI has issued standards on these provisions, however, in the absence of any mandatory requirements in the Companies Act, these standards are only voluntary. The law should be amended to implement other secretarial standards also, as recommended by ICSI and approved by central government, in line with the provisions adopted for accounting standards. So these are my brief points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajendra, very crisp. So this is the beginning which you have done. Now over to you, Geetika, your suggestion. Rajendra, whatever suggestion you have given, we have noted down and we will compile it and share it with you so you can fine tune it. Over to you, Geetika.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vijay, and my congratulations to corporate professionals for setting up and engaging all of us in such a brilliant manner. My apologies for not turning on the video. I'm very low on battery and I'm joining from my handheld. I assume I am well audible.
Yes, audible. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So quickly, I mean, most of the points Mr. Singhi has covered in the area of corporate governance. But I, as a professional, having practiced this across our entities, and when I say entities, I do not limit this only to the listed entities, but as well as the unlisted entities for whom I believe this was the first time that the norm of corporate governance was entered by virtue of the Companies Act 2013. It was the first time that unlisted entities heard or were required to have composition across the board, creation of stakeholders relationship committees, NRC audit committees, as well as internal audit. I do not believe we saw these in the earlier act, and somewhere this added up to the major provision that one of the most highlighting provisions that I have felt was the biggest addition in Companies Act 2013 being the section 166(2) and 3, where in a very formal and official way, the first time key decision makers of the company being the directors were in a way handheld with the duties and responsibilities to essentially promote governance. I do not believe while we had the officer in default concept in the earlier act as well, it was largely around your whole-time directors, your executive directors looking at this. But this was the first time where even the independent directors were covered somewhere by the Companies Act. And one saw this coming up more specifically when issues, corporate issues like Sahara and Satyam and all of them were picked up. If one looks at those orders from the court, one looks at how court has been insistent of the duties that the directors had to play in these issues. And I believe one of the best ways to say enable governance in a way, when we say that governance is a corporate governance is a system in which companies are directed and controlled, I believe this was one of the very important provisions that came about in the last act. And if I have to say connect the point as to what can happen better in terms of the future, I feel, however, that the awareness that we continuously can give to the directors, and I'm still speaking not as a listed entity person here, I'm saying for the unlisted entities where really Companies Act plays the bigger role, is where the awareness needs to come up for the independent directors. And that's where company secretaries also play a very important role as the gatekeepers of governance. One of the other pieces that I think everyone speaks about and has been the talk of the town ever since has been about the appointment of women directors on board. Yes, one did saw a stricter regime for the listed entities where women directors were not just non-independent, they were required to be were not required just to be simple women non-executive, but also to be independent. And the real concept beyond the whole women director concept, the real concept was to arrive at diversity. While I personally believe that diversity is much more than gender diversity, but this was a lovely step to start with. And I think we've all at corporates across listed and unlisted entities seen the benefit of this, how diversity plays up on the board, while in terms of decision making and in terms of governance at the board level. The transition is undeniable and very highly recognized at all levels: social, political, economic, cultural. However, without saying really much, there can be much more that can be done. And I somewhere feel that we all, even as professionals and people serving at listed entities and otherwise, really find it tough to have candidates across skills. It may not be because of the lack of candidates across diversity, and I do not speak just of women directors, but largely because of lack of enrollments at director data banks, and therefore the struggle is real. So maybe that's an area where we can, as an industry, take concerted efforts and improve. I'll move on quickly to the next pain point that one has. I have that as a pain point, and I somehow feel that while the Companies Act helped the industry distinguish between listed entities and unlisted entities and had clear set of governance norms, but purely certain companies, by virtue of being subsidiaries of listed entities, become deemed public companies, and the plethora of compliance that opens up for them is always something that we really spend a lot of time on. I wish, and I really, beyond the checklists that we make, I really wish that we understand more clearly from the from the regulator, that are these deemed public companies, or can we have more clarity on the subject so as to understand what does the regulator expect of us from making these governance norms. Obviously, I do not speak for the organization that I currently work for, where all standards are set to be similar for everyone. But as a general rule, it's good to have clarity of difference of compliance between a listed versus an unlisted versus a deemed public. With that, just one quick last point on vigil mechanism. It has been one of the additions, like the duties of directors, that I feel has brought about a lot of ease for the compliance officers for those unlisted companies where they really wanted to create cornerstones. It's a very far less known fact, very surprising though. Even when I speak to a lot of professionals, they are not aware that vigil mechanism and whistleblower is available for unlisted entities also, because there are really big unlisted entities who are unaware of applying these provisions and bringing them up for their stakeholders to give them availability of a reach out to their own audit committees or board and management. So I think the fundamental principles were laid down. I personally feel there can be a lot of awareness in this area as well. And the last point, quickly on disclosure, one of the most brilliant areas where disclosure was amped up and continues being amended from time to time is the annual return area, where I believe the comprehensiveness of the annual return today really means a lot. And I feel that the stakeholders, whosoever is able to download an annual return, can get a sense of what the organization is trying to do. Yes, it can always be improved, and I'm sure regulators across would do so, both at Companies Act and SEBI level, where they are looking at annual compliance report. However, having said that, I think for unlisted entities, it's a brilliant way of bringing about governance through transparency and disclosure. And there is a lot to be done, especially around decriminalization of offenses, but that's for another day. I think I may have already offshooted my time. Thank you, sir, again, for giving this opportunity, as always, to be of some value.
Thank you, Geetika, for giving very lucid point. Thank you. So now it's the turn of our champion of corporate governance, PK.
Thank you, Pawan. I'm no champion, but thank you very much for the confidence that you have in me, and thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts. Certainly, indeed, a seminal occasion to be discussing the completion of a decade of implementation of the new Companies Act. We've all kind of lived through this. So certainly very happy to be part of this forum. Certainly, the Companies Act of 2013 is a robust piece of legislation. It's been very futuristic and of course does consider the contemporary times that we live in. I think we must commend the Government of India and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs for doing all that they did to bring up a legislation of this kind. It's not very easy to bring up legislations. Most often we don't give them enough credit that they deserve. But I think both the regulators, whether it's MCA or SEBI, needs to be commended for the kind of regulations that they're bringing in to keep the corporate integrity intact. Fundamentally, of course, the legislation has changed the purpose of the corporation in itself by making the directors responsible not just to shareholders but to the stakeholders. Worldwide, this has not happened. So India is one of the first countries to have made this into a law, even advanced countries have been discussing as to what should be the role of the board and who are they accountable to. But I think we in India have gone past that hurdle and of course have clearly articulated that the board has a responsibility to the stakeholders. And of course, the CSR provisions have only cemented the fact that the purpose of the corporation is not just wealth maximization for shareholders, but it's actually creating sustainable long-term value creation for all of the stakeholders. Of course, the Act also comprehensively deals with the corporate governance practices and corporate governance mechanisms, which is absolutely necessary and of course assumes immense importance in times like this, and which the 1956 Act was silent on. I think, at least my view is, enough and more has been done by the regulators. I at least don't think there is need for any refresh at this point in time, nor do we need more laws or frameworks. I think we have got enough. I think what is more important is we need to implement all of these things in good spirit. I think that's most important. And I think there are two important stakeholders who need to probably build capacity and enhance competence. One of the stakeholders is the independent directors. The institution of independent directors needs to be further strengthened. Of late, I don't know, I'm a bit confused because I keep getting emails from people saying, I have passed the IICA certification, so I'm entitled to become independent director. I think that's a very wrong way to look at the institution of independent directors. The independent directors don't come with a position of power. The power they hold is their stature. So I think the way we have been understanding this institution seems to be a bit on the incorrect side. So I think there needs to be a lot more awareness, and I think industry and of course the policymakers, the industry bodies and MCA can partner in making sure that we don't dilute this institution called independent directors. The second stakeholder who needs to build a lot of capacity and enhance capability is we, the company secretaries. In fact, when you sent me the email saying we are here to discuss and reflect on the 10 years of the Companies Act, the first question I asked myself is, I think I need to reflect what have I done or how have I performed being a KMP for the last 10 years. The Companies Act has done what it needs to do. Ministry of Corporate Affairs has done what they need to do. They have trusted 3 KMPs. They have empowered 3 KMPs. They've given the KMPs the amount of power that they need. And I think we are one of the 3 KMPs. And I think possibly it's not a bad idea at all to reflect as company secretaries and as one of the 3 KMPs, have we actually performed and risen to the expectations of the stakeholders? And I really was reflecting, while I don't have a perfect answer, but at least I am honest in my reflection. I think time has come that we must realize that we are actually the chief governance officers, though not so called, but company secretaries certainly are the chief governance officers of the corporation. And I think time has come that we must build some of the contemporary skills that are required to be sitting in this position and making sure that we implement the regulations that are there in the right spirit. There are other mechanisms which Geetika spoke about, vigil mechanism. There is proxy advisory firms. And I think it is we who connect both the external and the internal stakeholders. We advise the board on governance practices, and hence I think a honest reflection of how we have performed, I think, is due. And I think there are many skills that are needed today to really do a great job sitting as a KMP. You need to have courage, you need to have strategic thinking, you need to have confidence, you need to have good communication skills, you need to be a crisis manager because crisis is becoming a new normal. So I think we must certainly reflect, and I think the legislation and the regulators, whether it is SEBI or MCA, they've trusted us, and I think we must live up to that trust. I think if we are able to do that, governance will become, of course, a reality. I don't think there's any more change that is needed. So with that, Pawan, thanks once again for this opportunity, and more importantly, to have brought in this thought in me that I need to reflect if I've done justice of being a KMP for the last 10 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, PK. As usual, you have given a different perception. Now over to you, Sudhakar, about the independent director. So can you give some few suggestions on independent director?
Sudhakar, you're on mute. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much, Pawan and the corporate professionals for having me here. In fact, Pawan, as I was discussing with you yesterday, a person like you only can conceive and implement this kind of an idea as well as a project. I know for the last 1 week how many time hours you were spending on this particular this thing. In fact, this, at least, let me frankly admit, this thought came to my mind that 10 years have passed by under the Companies Act after we are implementing that. As we all know that this is a very forward-looking legislation which has substantially raised the bar of corporate governance. However, in the initial phase that we faced a lot of difficulties, and Ministry of Corporate Affairs was very kind enough to understand all the difficulties, and with 4 amendments, lot of difficulties have been removed and the dust has been settled now, and we are enjoying the fruits of this Companies Act. One of the new concepts which have been brought in, though it has been borrowed from SOX 2002, that is the independent directors. In fact, as PK has mentioned that several people, the way they were sending him to the mails, that I was also receiving a lot of requests from people that I have cleared the exam of IICA and please recommend me or please suggest me to become the independent director of several companies. I always used to say that don't take the directorship as a vocation, and especially the independent directorships. No doubt about it, a very novel concept, noble concept, and a lot of responsibilities have been entrusted upon the independent directors. The good points are, under the Companies Act, the criteria is well defined, and the period is restricted to 2 terms of 10 years and with a cooling period of 3 years, so that they won't entrench upon the position as such. And the listing regulations have mandated the induction as well as the familiarization program, which is a very, very important thing. And in fact, I used to always advise when I go as a faculty to IOD that to do take up this induction as well as familiarization program very seriously. And even the corporates also have to take that, and the mandated training programs consistently and continuously. And it was supported by a well-defined code of conduct that is under Schedule 4. It is not only for the independent directors. Actually, according to me, this code is to be mandated to all the directors, not only independent directors. And another good thing what has been done is that issue of a appointment letter to the independent directors. Not only issuing the appointment letter and also putting it on the website of the company, clearly depicting the terms and conditions of his appointment. So these are certain good points which are there. And what are the future which we require? The independent director concept is evolving and growing multifold. As I mentioned that they have been entrusted upon with a lot of responsibilities, and these responsibilities are increasing day by day. And especially when the independent directors who are members of the audit committee have been asked to approve the related party transactions. Virtually the community of independent directors, according to me, got scared. Frankly speaking, as on date, if I have been offered an independent directorship, I have to think 100 times to whether to accept it or not. In fact, post my superannuation from Reliance, I have been offered 4 independent directorships. I couldn't have the courage to accept even one, because of my due diligence when I conducted, I have thought that the kind of responsibilities what I have to take and the kind of the companies what are and all, I thought it is not my cup of tea. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to have a mechanism to insulate the independent directors in case of difficulties. Because according to me, as on date, though 149(12) is there, that they will not be held liable under certain circumstances, that insulation is available only under the Companies Act. According to me, we cannot extend it to other legislations as such. So one is that a mechanism should be there to insulate them in case of any kind of difficulties. Number two, they should not be the first line of defense. At the point of time, what happened is something happens that first and foremost thing, the needle is going through the independent directors, which should not be the one. And performance linked compensation, because the kind of amount of responsibilities what the independent directors have to take, the reward is not in line with that. If the companies are having inadequate profits, if the companies are into losses, earlier they were not being paid anything. But of course, now some kind of changes have been made in Schedule 5 and some amount you can pay it. But I don't think that is sufficient enough. That is to be reviewed. Even if a company is having into losses or inadequate profits, but the amount of responsibility should be in proportion to the reward also. Considering the amount of time what the independent directors have to spend with the kind of responsibilities and accountabilities what they have been assigned with, I may be suggesting that the number of directorships of listed companies from 7, they have to be reduced to 4 or at the most 5, not beyond that. With that, what will happen is they will be having sufficient amount of time at their disposal and they can look it seriously. Another important thing what I would like to suggest is the way independent directors have to have one meeting exclusively for them without the presence of any executives once in a year. There should be at least 1 or maybe 2 meetings in a year of the independent directors with the KMPs and the senior management. And this is to be mandated. People may say that, look, anyway, this is happening. I don't think it is happening in all the companies. In good companies, this might be happening. But what, according to me, is at least 1 meeting in a year, if not more, are to be mandated of the independent directors with the KMPs as well as with the senior management. And another thing, though Kotak committee has recommended it, for unknown reasons, SEBI has not accepted that. That is the lead independent director. According to me, the concept of lead independent director is very good, because when the independent directors having certain issues among themselves, the question comes, who will bell the cat? Who will approach the chairman of the board? And sometimes it will be more difficult if it is the chairman is in an executive position. So there should be that lead independent director concept is to be mandated so that he will be the chain between the independent directors and the chairman of the board, and he can ensure certain concerns of the independent directors to be carried to the chairman. And finally, what I would like to say is that the independent directors should not be taken as if they are the superhuman beings and they are the people only who can do that. I mean, look at that everything and anything, whatever is happening, with every kind of a scam, some knee-jerk reaction is happening, and the role of independent directors is further getting enhanced, that the accountabilities and responsibilities are further getting increased. That's what I would like to say, Pawan. Thank you very much once again for having me here and for giving me this opportunity. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sudhakar. Friends, time is little short, so everybody should confine to 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Now, our real champion of corporate governance, who is jolting the entire corporate world, Mr. J.N. Gupta.
Sir, you are on mute.
Okay. First of all, I would like to compliment Sudhakar for changing in thinking post his retirement, where he said that the independent directors' number should be reduced. And sometimes I used to wonder, and I still wonder, how people who have got full-time employment find time to be on the board of 7 listed companies, 10 committees, and still do consultancy also. So that is one thing I agree with Sudhakar. And what happens generally, what independent directors have been doing mostly is that they have been taking this assignment as a post-retirement afternoon golf game. They go to the meeting and finish off in half an hour, 2 hours, and something like this. So this is where it has to change. But I will come to very substantial points where I really need. And first of all, I would say that being a regulator myself, I know that the regulations will always be changing. They will never be cast in stone because something will happen. But one more point Sudhakar made, which is wonderful, that independent directors are not superhuman beings. But I would say, please also see that regulators and government officials are also not superhuman beings. So when something goes wrong, the entire population start what SEBI was doing, what ministry was doing. So we can also make mistakes, the ministry can also make mistakes. That is one. Now come to the issues, first of all. There is a myth that independent directors are more worked and more responsible. Tell me where in last 10 years after independent directors have come, how many independent directors have resigned saying the work is too much, I can't cope it, or risk is too much. I think except PTC India Financial Services and one more company, there has been no resignation of independent director citing their problems. That is one point. So let us reconcile the two, whether they are in a problem or there is no problem. The third point that I want to make is this, that when you look at the regulation, I will come to the Companies Act. Now, I would say the one thing that has metamorphosized the entire corporate governance is the e-voting. If the e-voting was not there, there was no pressure on the corporate that their resolution can be defeated. And today that pressure has been created and corporates are very much anxious to know what is going to happen and what is going to be the recommendation of proxy advisors in their thing. That is one part. Now, what is happening, the present e-voting scenario is cart before the horse. You have voted first and the discussion happened later. And that was started because at that point of time, there was no concept of virtual meetings. Now, with the virtual meetings that have come, we got to think that e-voting should start after the AGM is over, as used to happen in the physical voting scenario. What is the problem with present? That resolution, when it is made, there is no scope for changing or amending the resolution based on the feedback of investors. So once you start voting after the AGM, virtual AGM is over, all that problem will go and it will be the not cart before the horse, it will be horse before the cart. The second thing is this, when these regulations were made, when the law was made, probably everything could not have been thought of. Now there is one section 160 where they say a shareholder can request for appointment of a director. Now that section is applicable to both situations where the director is being appointed through NRC route and where an independent shareholder wants to give a thing. To me, it is redundant or useless. Once the whole process is going through NRC, you need a resolution or application from a shareholder for appointment because anyway it is going for appointment. So that 160 has to be converted into 2. In a normal circumstances, you don't need any shareholder application. It is only when the shareholder is not happy with the company he wants to do. The second thing is section 100, where 10% of the shareholder can move an application for appointment of a director. Now there also we find a problem that since independent director as per the definition is one who is in the opinion of the board is independent. So under section 100, you can't appoint an independent director because board's opinion first is required. So we have to carve out a niche where if any application is moved through 100, section 100 or 160, the prerequisite of board's independence criteria would not apply. That is another part. Now, one more important thing which I really want is this, that at present preferential allotment to promoters is not a related party. Whereas in my opinion, it's one of the most abusive related party transaction. So preferential allotment of shares to promoters should also be subject to related party rule. Lastly, since the time is little, I will say MCA has to look into its filing. In my opinion, there is hardly any requirement for all filings to be on the MCA portal. It is only the confidential issue which should be there on MCA portal. Rest, there should be a creation of repository. That repository, everybody should file. There should be audit trail. And that repository data should be available to anyone, be it corporate, be it analyst, be it anybody, for research purpose, for using purpose. Only when this will happen, probably MCA's workload will come, because today MCA gets thousands and thousands of filing, but are unable to act because of the resource constraint. So when all this thing being given in repository, so any independent analyst can analyze. And third, as Madam Thakur said, the issue is that punishment has to be exemplary for wrongdoing. Once punishment is exemplary, probably all the problems will go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gupta ji. Thank you very much. You were tried. Thank you. So, friends, this session of governance, we have seen the 5 speakers. They have given different point of view. I'm not going to the detail. We are compiling this data and we will work out. Now, next session is RPT, related party transaction. So in this session, we have our 3 speakers with me, Anshul Jain, Rajendra Chopra, and Shweta Gerutra. So the 3 person they're the part of the big corporates and they are working out. So now I will request first Anshul Jain to start your point of view on this topic. As you are aware, in RPT, we have seen definition, clarity, enhanced disclosure, approval mechanism, mandatory reporting of audit committee, material threshold, approval of minority shareholders, independent director oversight, transparent valuation, audit inspection, annual disclosure. These are the development which we have seen. They have taken place. So now come to the other part, that what is the future. So over to you, Anshul, please. But my request is all that now we have to confide not more than 4.5 minutes. So quickly, in place of talking any other background, just come to your point. So it will be very helpful.
Right. Thank you very much, sir, for inviting me for this particular webinar. I'll just directly coming to the points that there are certain important welcome changes have been made in recent past with regard to the type of resolution from special to ordinary exemption to private companies from definition of 276. And however, there are certain practical difficulties which are faced by the companies, like identification RP. Identification of related party itself is a big area to work upon. Of course, it is nothing a legal issue, but many individuals are there who are still reluctant to share the relative data due to some or other issues. And that identification is to be done on the continuous basis. The other challenge which is there in the definition, which is used as per Ind AS and as per 276 for the that is for the financial statement, is followed something else, and for the compliance perspective under 276 is something else. So from the practical point of view, it creates some kind of confusion between the 2 different verticals in any company, like the secretarial department as well as the accounts department. So that has to be, I think should be rationalized to some extent. One of the another practical issue which with regard to the legal challenge which we face generally in implementation of law is overlapping the terms of references of the various committees. So for example, the remuneration of managing director being a related party, it is required to put to the test to the audit committee, where it is a primary responsibility of the NRC. Therefore, in case where any committee is assigned to a specific task by its terms of reference, the board or the company should be empowered to remove such overlapping. In past also, we have seen in Companies Amendment Act 2017, whereby the disclosure to be made in the board report was allowed to link with the financial statement. So there's the overlapping of the disclosure was removed by that Amendment Act. So therefore, such kind of provision can be made in the with regard to the overlapping of the responsibility, specifically to cover up the RPT related things. And there is no standard practices are being followed in this regard by the company. Some of the companies are taking to the audit committee, some of the companies are not taking to the audit committee. Some of the companies have made this particular point in their policy itself that this matter will be dealt by NRC. So to make the standardized practices, this amendment is required. Further, the definition itself is not talking about the promoter. So in the definition, the promoter can be added. With regard to the material related party transaction under the Companies Act. So there is no clear definition is given for the material related party transactions, because in form AOC2, we need to disclose even the transaction at arm's length basis and which are material in nature. We need to disclose as part of the financial statement. However, the definition per se is missing, though there is a guidance note provided by ICSI, but there is no such definition is provided under the Act. Some of the item which section 188(1)(d) talk about the availing or rendering of any services. I think this should also require to be some kind of rationalization, because some of the services may be exempted, like providing of loan or guarantee to the subsidiaries JVs from its holding company. This will ensure a lot of ease to the subsidiaries. Lastly, I would also like to mention about one of the important point with regard to section 180, the last proviso, is fifth proviso of 188(1), which requires the passing of resolution under the under this section is not applicable for the transaction entered into between holding company and its wholly owned subsidiary whose accounts are consolidated with such holding company and placed before the shareholder for the general meeting for the approval. Now, companies' accounts rules also give the exemption for the intermittent subsidiary for the consolidation of accounts in case of certain conditions if they can fulfill. So if such holding company is an intermittent holding company and exempted from the consolidation of the account, then this exemption technically is not available. So, however, it does not seem to be the intent of the law. Therefore, this can be corrected as per my understanding, so as to include the ultimate holding companies also. So, in this particular provision. So, with this, I thank once again the corporate professional team led by Mr. Pawan for inviting me, for sharing my thought. My co-panelist in this session will share more points on this subject. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anshul. Thank you. And now, Sweta, what are your views on this RPT, Animalize, and various other things?
Certainly. Thank you, Team Corporate Professional, for bringing all of us together at this platform so that we can celebrate the 10-year journey of the Companies Act 2013. And congratulations for release of the book to Corporate Professional team. I would extend the point made by my co-panelist Anshul, where he's mentioning that there is an overlap in the requirements in the provisions, and also there are certain areas where the clarity is missing. So if we talk about related party transactions per se are not bad or illegal. At times it is wise for the organization to execute a transaction with a related party, considering the fact that it may have economical interest. It makes more commercial sense for the organization to do the transaction with related parties. So what is the concern? The concern is the inherent risk of having a conflict of interest when you are doing such transaction with the related party. So my suggestion would be that we have to have a clarity or a more focus being given that the conflict of interest needs to be monitored and regulated in detail. Taking my first point as or a suggestion that as per section 188 of the Companies Act, first subsection says that any contract with a related party for specified matters which requires board and shareholders approval, the proviso says that nothing will apply if the transaction is in the ordinary course of business or at arm's length basis. Now, this ordinary course of business is not clearly defined under the Act. There is no clear definition. This is a very subjective matter. So at times the organization interpreted differently. Of course, every business has its own nuances. They have their own fine lines of business interpretations. But if any guidelines or principles have been given by the regulator, it will be easy for the corporates to implement this in an effective manner. Extended point here that when we talk about arm's length, determination of arm's length transaction basis, at times the organization interpret that it is only the commercial value of the transaction which is relevant here. But it is not just the commercial value of transaction, it is also about the terms and conditions, the quality, the delivery, many other aspects. So a guideline will definitely be helpful for the industry to implement this better. Second point which I want to mention over here is that we all know that the amendment in the listing regulations, with those amendments, the scope of related party and related party transactions have widened manifold. So the listed entities are required to approve the transactions, especially for the listed entities and its subsidiaries on one hand, and related parties and related parties of subsidiaries on the other hand, meaning thereby, so the transactions executed by the subsidiaries of a listed entities, and these subsidiaries are unlisted subsidiaries, will also sail through unless the same will not sail through unless the same is also being approved by the listed entity. Imagine a scenario that a transaction has been approved by the unlisted subsidiaries board, and when it has reached to the holding company, which is a listed entity, and that transaction has been disapproved, what would be the fate of this transaction? So these are some of the missing links which needs to be evaluated when we talk about gathering suggestions. A clear guidelines to address such anomalies will be very helpful when we bridge the gaps between the Companies Act provisions and the listing and regulations, which talks about the related party transactions. Advice on how to implement related party provisions when we talk about, it's about large groups, because now we know that the indirect related party transactions are also coming under the fold. So advice, especially where we have multiple subsidiaries, where we have group entities involved, that would be really helpful if we have some clarity on that. Next, I would say the transactions which require shareholders' approval. While we decide on the materiality threshold, which is the cumulative value of a transaction with a related party in a particular financial year, but there is also a need to have a clarity on whether what all type of services, work, contracts should be put in the same bucket, or it has to be dealt with separately. These are some of the areas where industry is interpreting it as per their own understanding, but a common consistency will definitely be helpful in these areas. Now I conclude my point at this note, keeping it very short and brief. Thank you so much, corporate professional, for giving me this opportunity and platform to share my views. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you very much. Rajinder, you have working in a large company and you have so many transactions related to related party have come across. Please tell us what changes should we bring.
Thank you, Pawan, and entire corporate professional team for having me here. My co-panelist Ansul and Shweta has already explained most of the areas where we could have given the suggestion. I will touch upon a particular point. If we see the Companies Act, prior to this Companies Act 2013 era, there was no concept of related party under Companies Act 1956. And related party transactions were, dealt by the accounting standard 18, which was notified by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Companies Act largely used to deal with the provisions which was conflict of interest. If there are any transaction by the directors or their entities or their relatives, etc., that required some level of compliances under the Act, which could include the disclosure, which could include the central government approval or the board approval. Of course, the provisions were not sufficient, and therefore there was need which was felt for review of the provision, and rightfully the provisions on the related party were incorporated in the Companies Act 2013. And to large extent, it has achieved the purpose. There are compliances, governance, disclosure, transparency. So, of course, it has achieved to some extent the purpose for which the provisions were brought into. But if you closely look at the provision, unfortunately, while incorporating the provisions on related party transactions, the concept of conflict of interest and related party, which were two distinct and clearly, separate concept under the old provision, were merged into under the 2013 Act. And the result is that, today the transaction by a company with its subsidiary or a joint venture or a associate company has to go through the same level of compliances, even if there is no conflict of interest, no promoter stake is involved, etc. At the same level of compliance which a company is required to do if there were a transaction with the promoters or KMPs or any of the entities of the KMP or promoter or their relative, etc. What is the challenge? The challenge is that it result into a lot of administrative work for the companies. It doesn't serve any purpose for the regulator or for the investor. And in fact, investors or the readers of this information are flooded with the information to the extent that there is a risk of such reader or user of the information missing the real information which the law or law has intended to highlight or bring to the notice. So my suggestion is, if we can relook at the provision and understand the difference between the conflict of interest and other related party transaction, and can maintain the stringent provision for the conflict of interest, which can include the approvals, which can include the restrictions and certain guidelines, and we can keep the other related party transactions only for the disclosure, it will be nice. And it will not compromise the governance standard on the compliances. Interestingly, if you look at the provision, why these provisions were introduced? Because there were several instances of diversion of fund by the companies through subsidiary, by the promoters or KMPs, etc., through subsidiary company. Now look at the interesting part. The company law has been, new company law has extensive provision on the related party transaction. But if a promoter want to, if you see, most transactions of siphoning of fund or diversion were happening through subsidiary company. Now today, even today, after such extensive provision, if a promoter or a director want to divert the fund from through the subsidiary companies, and suppose subsidiary companies board are not independent board or are the in-house or the compliance board, it can still do without coming to the board of the main company or the parent company. So the main purpose for which this extensive provision was incorporated is still defeated. The company or the promoter, if they want to divert the fund, they can very conveniently divert the fund through the chain of subsidiary company without the involvement of the promoter of the board of directors of the listed company. So if we want to achieve this purpose, there is a need for us to relook at the provision and understand, and to make the compliances more objective and to reduce the administrative burden on the corporates. Second is because there is a confusion between conflict of interest and RPT. You will see a lot of conflicting provision, and some of the provision like Shweta and Anshul have highlighted. But look at this, the 188 has a provision on the related party transaction, but when it comes to 177, it uses the term transaction with the related party. 188 nowhere provides that there need to be oversight of the transactions by the audit committee. Of course, it comes impliedly through 177. But there is a need for consistency, like Shweta said, that if we can have a definition of the related party transactions. If you read 2 subsection 76, it says related party means a party where the director hold more than 2% shares in any entity, either singly or with their relative. Now, when you go to 184, it says if a director together with other director hold more than 2% share in any other entity. So on the one side, they says directors plus family more than 2% is a related party. When you go to 184, it says director plus other director more than 2% is covered under that. So these are, I think, some of the unintended implications because we did not understand the difference, and there are, of course, there is an opportunity for us to relook at this. And, of course, Shweta and Anshul has already highlighted, but my submission is if we can synchronize the provision between the Companies Act and the listing regulations and the Ind AS or accounting standard, even the definition of related party is not common. So if we can we can have a common definition and common compliance requirement or common provisions under the law, I think that will give a lot of convenience to the companies and avoid a lot of confusion which we hear in our day-to-day. Thank you, Pawan. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajinder, for confining the time. Now, friends, next session is corporate social responsibility. And this session, we have Mr. J. Sridhar. He's past president ICSI and Bajaj Auto, Samit Gambhir, and Sanaullah from Wipro, and Samit is from DCM Shriram. We have seen that there are so many changes has taken place: mandatory CSR spending, CSR policy, CSR committee, eligible CSR activity, annual CSR reporting, CSR impact assessment, local community engagement, CSR collaboration, CSR technology adoption, and CSR outreach. These are the development has taken place. But now what is more? So over to you, Samit first. You please tell us, and then Sridhar and Sana will speak. So Samit, what do you say?
Thank you, Pawan sir, for having me here, and thanks my all co-panelists, all known friends and all. I think this was one of the very talked about provision in 2014 because ये दुनिया में कहीं नहीं था जो हमने हिंदुस्तान में देखा कि CSR को लाया हम कंपनी एक्ट में. But the only thing is, as Damodharan sir was also saying, that till the time it was comply or explained, it was actually a good, because ultimately everyone is there. We all have a duty to give it back to the society. So every corporate is, and I think this provision was really, really good. But I think up to some extent, when we are making the penal provisions and all this is something which we are going a little overburden, I would say. But still, to my knowledge, to my understanding, I think it should be okay even if we are able to explain to the shareholders and the reasons therefore that we are not able to spend full, because ultimately the idea is to make the genuine CSR rather than as a compulsion do something. And wonderfully, what we have seen is that Indian INC has taken it in a very, very open way. This was taken a very welcome step. आज की डेट में भी मैं कहीं देख रहा था डेटा, तो 1,40,000 करोड़ तक की CSR हो चुकी है अभी तक, एंड फाइनेंशियल ईयर 21-22 itself में ही करीब 26,000 प्रोजेक्ट और 30,000 करोड़ के आसपास हुई है, which is not a small amount. I think the people are actually doing CSR, but don't it's not a good idea to put them in the regulatory framework too much that the compliance के अंदर ही बेचारे थोड़ा सा CSR के अंदर हो जाए. But the other thing is that some of the things which are good is impact assessment, but there is no such format or no such idea that what exactly the impact assessment should be. If the regulator can actually, if there is a requirement of impact assessment, it's a good requirement, but I think regulator can do some kind of a frameworking in terms of impact assessment, that this is what should be minimum requirement for impact assessment. That's another good point, that they have allowed impact assessment amount up to some extent to be included in CSR expenses, which is required. Plus, the expenses are up to only 5%. While we have seen in our organization and other also that, in fact, managing CSR is not a very easy thing. The company which have 100 crore, 50 crore of CSR to be spent, they need some expenses to be done, because you need to have team, you need to have function. And then when you're talking about the projects, there's a lot of traveling, a lot of resource required. So up to some extent, when you hire a consultant for a particular project, you can take it into CSR budget. But other than that, there are people who are actually on the role of your foundation or organization doing CSR. I'm not sure whether we can take this as a administrative expenses under CSR or not. So these are something I think maybe, we can, rather than 5%, we can increase or maybe recommend this to be increased at least 10% in my view. Plus, in addition to that, I think somewhere I was thinking that we should also give a liberty to do some more things other than the Schedule 7, or maybe Schedule 7 to be increased. Maybe somewhere regulator has said that it should not be taken as a very, very aggressive. It should be taken in a very open-minded way. But still, some projects are there which are not there in the Schedule 7, and some kind of things. Like when we see the sustainable goals of UN, then we find a lot of things wherein, one can actually spend money. But since some things are not covered under Schedule 7 and we said that these are not covered, so let us not take that panga. So I think, but overall, जैसे कि CSR compliance का भी आया है कि CSR 2 file करना पड़ता है, तो I think what I was told by my team that you have to file it twice, once with AOC 4 along with CSR 2 also goes, and one is otherwise also CSR 2 goes. So I don't know what is the reason for this duplicate, but maybe, there could be something in that, or maybe it will be discontinued next year onwards. Other than that, if you're talking about the committees and all, now they have done very good that a committee has to actually find out an action plan, which is a good thing. CSR committee meetings, according to me, should be made at least 2 meetings mandatory. One is mandatory. I think it should be made at least minimum 2 meetings mandatory, so that CSR committee can actually take mid-term review of the projects, what is happening, what is not happening. The other last point I just wanted to make, and I'll make it a quick last point, I wanted to make it that when we say that at the end of the year, there is a fund available in the CSR kitty. And one is that if there are ongoing projects, you have to spend it within 3 years and you have to park it in a separate bank account. If it is not an ongoing project, then within 6 months, you have to give it to the fund as provided in Schedule 7, which I was thinking, but maybe what can be done is that sometime at the end of the year, we are not sure whether this ongoing project will be able to be completed in the next 6 months, or it will continue for the next ongoing project. So either a project which is continuing, the chances are that the project may complete in the next 3-4 months. In that scenario, I may not be required to take it as a ongoing project for the next 3 years. So if I have a liberty to, to put the money after 6 months in the fund, so I should have a liberty to keep that money also till 6 months in that bank account to spend over that, and then let's see if not required, then I can give it, or if not spent, I can give it to the fund. So I think in both the cases, 6 months time period can be given, because in the first one, it's to be deposited in 30 days in case you are spending in ongoing projects. Ongoing projects का time भी थोड़ा बढ़ा देना चाहिए मेरे हिसाब से, क्योंकि 3 साल में कई बार बड़े प्रोजेक्ट हम हाथ में लेने से डरते हैं कि यार ये 3 साल में पूरा नहीं होगा तो फिर और challenges आएंगे. So these are some of the things I think, but it's a very, very wonderful provision, and India के अलावा और कहीं नहीं है, so it's something very unique to us, and I think our corporates are really, really doing good job in this. So I'll stop here, Pawanji.
Okay, thank you, Samit, thank you very much. Okay, now, Sridhar, your turn, your view on this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pawan. In fact, for the benefit of the others, I might just mention that I was really fortunate to be a witness yesterday in Delhi. I was with Pawan, and I could see him having a real hectic schedule in organizing today's momentous program. So heartiest congratulations, Pawan, for the wonderful job you have done. Heartiest congratulations. Yeah, and as Samit also correctly mentioned, I think this CSR provisions have been probably the most important and the most unique change that was brought about in Companies Act 2013. While I think there were several other changes, but I think the most talked about change was, I think, relating to CSR undoubtedly. And as of course, India became probably the first and the only country in the world to have statutorily mandated CSR for corporates. And we also are aware of the tremendous resistance that the Indian corporates had just before the bill was being mooted, and then when the thing became an act. And then, in fact, the corporates were not so much against spending on CSR, but they were reluctant because they did not want the conscience to be mandated through law. And they were even ready to pay 2% as tax in place of CSR. But anyway, those things are now things of the past. And today, I think in retrospect, I think the corporates are also quite happy that these provisions are there. And then I think it must be said to the credit of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, as well as all the political parties, whether in the ruling side or the opposition side, who are all very much in favor of having the CSR provisions introduced in the Companies Act. And then, so now, of course, we are here to see the thing taking deep roots. And of course, during this journey of last 10 years, a lot of new concepts have been added in the CSR provisions. And whether the concept of administrative overheads or ongoing projects or annual action plans, CSR policy being expanded, and then the CSR reporting, impact assessment through independent agencies, display of CSR activities on website, and transfer of unspent CSR account, and the carry forward set of provisions, etc. I mean, a lot of changes have come about, and I'm sure there are many more changes which are awaited, which will still come, and we can await all those. And as Samit also mentioned, I also have just a few suggestions on the subject. And as he rightly pointed out, Schedule 7, still there is a lot of scope for improvement, and I think the activities can be described in a better fashion in many respects. And then again, the various circulars which MCA has been coming out with from time to time, I think have been good, but in many respects, they have also created more confusion. And in many cases, practical implementation becomes pretty complex by all those FAQs. And then, of course, the FAQ of 25th August 2021, of course, which was fairly dramatic FAQs. That particular thing has come out with many changes, which are not very practical. For example, they have come out with the concept of utilization rather than spending. And probably that was not really required. It was going probably beyond law, and FAQs, I think, have to be revisited there. And the other aspect is even the FAQs, they have said it is in supersession of all the previous circulars. So would it mean that some of the circulars where it stated that there will be a liberal interpretation of the provisions contained in Schedule 7, etc., whether that will no longer hold good? So I think MCA needs to clarify whether that liberal interpretation will be made by MCA while interpreting the activities contained in Schedule 7. And as far as the impact assessment provisions are concerned, as I think Samit also mentioned, I think there needs to be more incentives provided for carrying out impact assessments, and even voluntary impact assessment, I think, should be encouraged, and the benefit of all those limits to be considered as CSR expenditure should be extended even to voluntary CSR expenditure, voluntary impact assessment studies. And again, that period of 1 year, which is provided beyond, before which it cannot be done, I think that should also be relaxed, it should be revisited, because there may be many cases where the impact assessment may have to be carried out very fast, and you can't wait for 1 year to assess the impact. And for example, during the COVID time, we saw, and many of the impact assessment had to be carried out immediately. But then if you are putting a provision that it has to be done only after a year, then it is becoming a little counterproductive. And then even that annual CSR reporting requires the IA reports to be attached, or at least the details to be provided. I think once the link is provided, I think they should not insist on putting all that. And then there's the other part with regard to normal course of business. And I mean, that is not CSR as per the definition, which in a way is right, which is well intended. But if you look at the BRSR or the sustainability report, or integrated reporting, etc., there the concept is that the activities should be embedded. Such activities should be embedded in the business. So they are going a little contrary. So I think they should get aligned properly. And then, so where it is the normal course of business, but not exactly the part of the business, I think should be allowed as CSR also. I think one has to discuss a little bit and then maybe come out with some proper solutions for that. And then the thresholds for CSR also, I think, may have to be reconsidered, because I think having the threshold of turnover and net worth, I think, is quite redundant. I think just having the average of profits for the previous 3 years being 5 crores or more, I think that should alone be sufficient. And because I think the net turnover and net worth criteria actually are not really required. And then, as Amit also mentioned, I think the number of CSR meetings in a year should be more than what is currently being done. So there is no mandatory requirement today. I think it should be more. And as far as the audit and other aspects by, independent agencies are concerned, that should also be there. And then, of course, now we have seen in the BRSR, in the SEBI thing, you have the assurance report coming in. So we'll have to decide whether, of course, in consultation with ICAI, whether it should be kind of assurance or whether it should be an audit of the CSR activities and social audit and so on. So those things are also to be considered. And I think since the time is a little short, I think I'll stop with this. Thanks a lot, Pawan, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankushri. Thank you. Now, Sana, your company is doing lots of work in CSR. So you can tell us something more. Sana, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Pawan. And it's a privilege to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Pawan. It's a wonderful thing that Corporate Professionals has taken up this session, and it's definitely useful for all the professionals. Now coming to CSR, a lot has been already said by both my previous speakers, Sridhar as well as Samit. But I will try and touch upon some of the aspects which are not, mentioned by these two gentlemen. I think today the most important boardroom topic is ESG. So it's not just CSR; it is all the three aspects of environment, social, and governance. That's the prime focus of any boardroom discussion today. And rightly so, 10 years back, this has been notified. And since then, it's been a good journey, I must say. I think we started off well. And initially, there was a bit surprised in terms of why corporates are being asked to focus on CSR, while the focus of the corporate should be more on the business and not on society. However, we quickly realized, and in a developing nation like India, I think it's very important that the corporates play a very important role in developing the societies and the communities they work in. Coming back to just the pain points that I would say, while there are several good aspects there that we started off well, the 22 amendment has been a little bit of a pain in terms of impact assessment and recovering back the unspent amount and things like that. There are a couple of provisions which are very good, like corporates can now collaborate and work on CSR. So a well-established corporate can handhold and encourage a new corporate which is starting its journey on CSR and guide the smaller corporate. So I think that is a very welcome step. Similarly, set-off provisions are very, very good in terms of if there is an excess spend, all of us spent more than the 2% that is prescribed under the law and spent more during the COVID time especially. And whenever there is such overspend, it can be carried forward. So some of these are very welcome provisions. However, the pain points are, Sridhar has touched upon the criteria for, the companies which need to spend on CSR. I think the pain point is 5 crores of net profit. So I think the net worth and turnover are relatively okay in terms of the applicability of the CSR provisions. But I think the 5 crore net profit is very, very low in my view. So if a company is doing a 10% net profit kind of business, and if its turnover is 50 crores, it will become applicable, and it's too small a company to start with to focus on the CSR. Initially, companies, when they are starting their businesses and when they are in their initial stages, they need to focus a lot, and their management bandwidth is more on growing the business and growing the company. So I think 5 crore net profit needs to be relooked at in today's context, and I think it has to be significantly higher in my view for a company to fall into the bracket of CSR spend. That is one. Similarly, a lot of other smaller companies, the compliance officers and company secretaries have reached out to me in the past as well, saying that we do have a 5 crore profit, but we don't have a cash profit, in the sense that we are just able to break even, or we have just made a small profit, but at the same time, we do not have cash profits, and we do not have cash profits to pay salaries. So especially during the COVID time. So how do we kind of ensure that we spend on CSR. So I think this 5 crore profit needs to be relooked at. That is one point I would like to highlight. The second point I would like to highlight is on impact assessment, though this is already briefly touched upon by my previous speakers. I think the more important thing here is that there is a Schedule 7 which prescribes the areas on which the company need to focus on, or which will qualify for the CSR activities. So once a corporate is focusing on those areas and it is monitored by the CSR committee of the company, and there is a team that is looking after this. Now, doing an impact assessment of that particular area is a little difficult in terms of it is a very subjective term. Now, for example, preserving national heritage is a focused area under Schedule 7. So under that, if a company is spending some amount as a renovation of some a historical site, or if it opens a museum or something like that, how do you assess the impact of that particular spend in a 1-year period? I mean, it has to be a long-term view, and some of these subjective things, it is very difficult to do an impact assessment. So I think it should be left to the boards, like Sridhar is saying, that whether an impact assessment is to be carried out or not, and it should not be mandated or prescribed on the corporate. Similarly, Wipro does a lot of work, for example, in notified backward areas. We go open a school. So it takes a lot of time to kind of gather the communities there, bring the children to the school, and the school starts functioning. It takes a lot of time. So in a short-term view, you may or may not be able to create an impact, but a longer-term view, definitely there will be an impact on the society. I think the impact assessment part definitely requires a relook at, is my humble opinion. And the other part is there's a lot of administrative hassle that the 22 January amendment that has created. Like, getting back the money from an intermediary after it is given is not an easy task. And a lot of bandwidth goes into that, opening a bank account, unspent bank account, and all of those things, administrative hassles have to be removed. Corporates should be encouraged to spend on CSR. There should be enabling provisions and there should be an encouragement. But at the same time, if we remove these administrative hassles, I'm sure a lot more focus can happen on the CSR per se, rather than on the administrative part. If there is an unspent amount, what we can do is that the corporates can stop their next year grant of that particular intermediary and make sure that the previous year grant is spent on, and then only the next year grant will be released. So there could be other mechanisms through which we can monitor this. And similarly, instead of prescribing that 100% of the amount should be spent in 1 year, if we say 75% should be spent and 25% can be discretionary and can be carried forward to the next year, that gives a lot of flexibility to the corporates to operate. The third and last point I would like to say is that instead of prescribing that the amount should be spent in a particular year, if we can earmark that amount to a particular project, like when you are visualizing something big and you are opening school or something, you will earmark certain funds, and in a particular year, the spend will be lesser, but in the next year, the spend will be higher. So instead of a per financial year basis determination, if we say per project or per program basis, an amount will be earmarked, and for the completion of that project, it might take sometimes 3 years or 5 years. In that case, a longer term view, a longer term impact can be enabled by the company. So these are 3-4 views. I thought I'll not take much time. The other last point I would like to say is that there is a CSR committee that we are constituting to monitor, approve the policy, plan, etc. But at the same time, there is also a requirement in the Act that all of this also has to be approved by the board. I think that is an unnecessary hassle again. It can be noted by the board when the CSR committee meets, it prepares its minutes, and the CSR committee chair briefs the board at the board meeting what are the deliberations, and a simple note can be given to the board for its noting. But when a CSR committee is there, it is easier for us to convene the meetings of the CSR committee at shorter intervals and make sure that the CSR committee is approving the things it needs to be approved. But when it requires also a board approval, it is slightly difficult administrative process, and maybe it should be left to the CSR committee rather than again prescribing that the board should also approve it. So I will stop here, Pawan, in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Sana. Thank you. And all these suggestions which you have given, we will make it and show it to you, then before submitting. Thank you very much. Now, friends, our next session is account and financial reporting. As you are aware, that today we have a very true learned speaker, Mr. Ashok Haldia, who was a ex-secretary of ICI, and he was a chairman and managing director of the listed company. And R.K. Agarwalji is a practicing chartered accountant. So, have you seen this, that this particular law has brought out so many changes, international IFRS, consolidation financial results, enhanced disclosure, financial statements adequate audit committee, strict audit independence rule, consolidation of subsidiary, XBRL, comparative reporting. These development has taken place. What is more required? Over to you, Ashokji. You can just tell us, and then R.K. Agarwalji.
Thank you, Pawanji, for inviting me. Let me just first, you have very elaborately touched upon in your paper the reforms that have been carried out since 2013 or Companies Act 2013. Let me touch upon, before I start giving suggestions, two major thrusts of the Act. One is that the emphasis on the corporate governance. That emphasis on the corporate governance lays emphasis more importantly and equally on the accounting and financial reporting. It lays down and elaborates the role of audit committee, the role of CFO, the role of auditor, the role of board, and also in some way the role of regulator. So that's very important. The second aspect that it has dealt with is that it has set up a NAFRA, a new regulator. Now, NAFRA is intended to give impetus to the effective implementation and the compliance of the provision related to accounting and financial reporting. Now, having touched upon these two thrust areas of the Companies Act, I was a part of, or I was invited by the Finance Committee of the Parliament on Companies Act 2013. And their entire emphasis was because of Satyam and on the accounting and financial reporting. Let me touch upon what is the first thing that to me is important. One is the NAFRA has a role of regulation and development. Possibly the role of NAFRA has been restricted to regulations. To me, they need to focus on the developmental role. My emphasis has all along been that the role of regulation should minimize once the development of the profession or the compliance of the accounting standards and also in the industries takes place. The second thing is there are a number of regulators in the country. You have SEBI, you have MCA, you have RBI, you have ICI, and so on and so forth. Now, I believe there has to be a central agencies or a coordinated agency or an agency to coordinate, or at least if there are jurisdiction conflicts, then there has to be some mechanism for coordination between different agencies. This initiative was taken, if I correctly remember, as far back 15 years ago. But for the obvious reason, it has not taken forward. There is a need to carry that forward. The second thing is that the law provides for accountability. The law is enough. I don't think we need to tinker with the law anymore, and a law more can be more stringent what it is now. But what lacks is the accountability and the enforcement. Now, that quality of accounting and financial reporting is the role lies with the entire value chain, and that includes CFO, the audit committee, the regulator itself, the users of the financial statements, the preparer of the financial statement. Now there is a need for extending the role of NAFRA to the entire value chain and also increasing the awareness among all the stakeholders that, look, it is not the auditor who is primary responsible, but he is not wholly responsible. And therefore, they have to share that responsibility. The fourth thing is that I would say emphasis point is that there has been emphasis on CSR. Very important. I'm not undermining the significance of the CSR. But what is important now increasingly has become is the climate reporting and the ESG. And I believe the Companies Act provides and the SEBI guidelines provides for setting up of a CSR committee. But I believe time has come that we should set up, there should be provision for separate ESG committee. Let us understand that ESG and CSR are different ball together. And therefore we can't rely on the CSR, which is more of a, if I can use in the current talk or current context, a charitable or a promotional activity if I'm not using the harsh word. The fifth thing that I have is the fraud and forensic. Very emphasis of all the stakeholders, and rightly so, Pawanji, because all of us are concerned about that. But then we all rely on the role of auditor. Let's understand expectations gaps are huge, but that is going on for centuries. Let us accept that, and we need to find a solution which has been eluding world over for centuries. Auditors with the statutory audit, they cannot be they cannot do forensic audit. They cannot be a forensic auditor, or they cannot detect the fraud. We need to have a separate mechanism under the law for sensitive companies to provide for a forensic audit periodically or wherever the need arises. And when the need and when the fraud does take place, I believe we need to tackle that more efficiently and also effectively. So, Pawanji, I think within the 5 minutes time, I'm over with that. I'm already working on some paper on that. But if you're keen, I will be interested in sharing my more thoughts and in detail. Thank you very much, Pawanji.
Definitely, sir. We will take your help on this. So thank you giving the very specific suggestions. Now come to the R.K. Agrawalji. He's a practicing chartered accountant, so we can understand and we can get his view on the auditor, capital formation, and other thing. Over to you, R.K. Agrawalji.
Thank you, Pawan. Coming direct to the point where I would like to make some suggestions in the area of audit and financial reporting. First of all, auditors rotation was the provision which was brought by Companies Act 2013. And as Mr. Damodaran has also pointed out, that it has not been that effective so as to ensure the independence of auditors. The term of 5 + 5, then with a gap of 5 years, again 5 + 5 does not satisfy or is not adequate enough to ensure that there is independence of auditors. Because independence of auditors is certainly required for the purpose of free and unbiased reporting. And for that, I feel that two things are required. First of all, the rotation of auditor, the term of auditor should not be more than 3 years. And there should not be, again, appointing the same auditors. The appointment should be either some regulatory mechanism or some panel with objective criteria out of which the selection of auditors is made. If the selection is entirely in the hands of the management for a long term, then it is difficult to bring the independence of the auditors. Secondly, in our country, particularly in closely held companies, statutory auditor is not, in fact, as an auditor, or the capacity, the position of auditor is like a regulator. But we see practically that statutory auditor are as a consultant in the company. They do financial consultancy, they do management consultancy, they do tax consultancy, and along with that, they do statutory audit also. How can you expect from a consultant that they can be unbiased or they can be independent so as to be company, or that is not possible. So therefore, for the purpose of independence of auditors, the statutory auditor should be a person who will not do any other consultancy assignment. That provision is partially brought in, but it is not practically effective. It has to be made effective. So if a company wants a consultant, has to be a separate firm or separate consultant, separate professional. And the statutory auditor is more to act one thing. Secondly, the kind of responsibilities which have increased, and particularly the imposition of section 447 in the case of auditors also bringing the criminal offense. It has made the work of the auditor or to accept the assignment of auditor very difficult. People are afraid of doing the statutory audit, the kind of responsibilities which have increased. We have to understand the real expectation which should be from the auditor. As Mr. Haldia also pointed out, that statutory auditor cannot bring out all the frauds which have been committed by the company. But in our society, as well as the regulator, the perception is that if any wrong doing is in the company, first of all, statutory auditor is responsible for that. It should not be like that. The expectation and perception from the auditor should be realistic. And for professional negligence, invoking of section 447 has got no meaning at all. Otherwise, I mean, people will be afraid of taking this position of finding the good auditors with this kind of responsibility. Third, regarding the reporting part, one ESG impact assessment reporting can be brought in the director's report. That point has already been discussed. Another thing is risk assessment, which Mr. Damodaran also talked. And I feel that internal control system and for risk assessment is a very important area. It is, and for that purpose, for that, if we can bring some kind of objective criteria where the reporting of the risk, perceived risks by the management, and how the risks are being taken care of or are being addressed. That is that kind of report is
Agarwalji, you have to unmute yourself.
Issued by the management or in the Caro report by the auditors. That even it can. Yes, I am unmute, Pawan.
Your voice, there was some problem with the network. Please carry on.
Yes, yes. So we can bring that kind of reporting, or there can be a reporting or some rating system regarding the financial soundness of the company. Because when we can create some rating system where the financial health of the company is reported. If it is going in wrong direction, or there is diversion, or there is misappropriation of funds, there is some reporting system where some rating system rather, where financial soundness of the company is assessed and it is reported. If we can develop that kind of system. And last point which I would like to make, that so far as the amount taken from directors and shareholders should be in the exempt category. It should not be, if directors and shareholders are contributing, then it should be allowed. So these are some of the points, Pawan, which you can take note. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Agarwalji. Thank you. Now, we have next session is capital fundraising. So there are so many developments has taken place.
How to value a company by corporate professionals. Valuation determines the economic worth of a company under certain assumptions and limitations on a valuation date. You need business valuation for mergers and acquisitions, fundraising, sale of businesses, succession planning, and regulatory purposes.
Just check something is
valuation, asset.
Capital fundraising, we have seen that there are so many things as implemented. Introduction of private placement, enhanced disclosure requirement, reduce regulatory hurdles, dematerialization of security, preferential allotment group, and debenture trustee. Anjali and Savitri was there, but Savitri, she has another program and we are just overshooting, so we are missing one speaker here. She will she will give her suggestion. Anjali, over to you. What are your points relating to this?
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Good evening, everyone, to the esteemed panelists. And I'm really missing my co-panelist, Savitri ma'am. To begin with, we have come a long way from the 81(1)(a), which comprised of fundraising provisions under the 56 Act. Now we have 42, 62, Rule 13, Rule 14. So many things are there. But still, I feel there are certain things which are needed to be looked into, or which still have some confusion under the present law. For example, if we talk about the present arena of fundraising for the startups or the new tech companies, wherein the fund requirement is much different from what used to be or what is for a typical company which is there. So these companies do not go by merely equity fundraising or by way of only debt fundraising. These entities are raising funds by way of hybrid securities, so that these entities do not remain there is no fund crunch in these companies. I feel that there should be ample scope in the Companies Act to enable these companies to be able to raise funds in a better way. Moreover, these companies are needed to comply with the provisions of Companies Act, simultaneously look into the provisions of FEMA as well. And when we talk about Companies Act and FEMA, these are 2 coins of the same side. So these should be made aligned to each other, so that there is no scope for any ambiguity or any problems being faced by these entities. Likewise, when we talk about listed arena, SEBI is coming out with so many bonds issuances. I feel that there should be ample provisions under the Companies Act as well to be able to, for various entities to be raised various kinds of bonds. There are yellow bonds, blue bonds, green bonds. So those provisions should be there under the Companies Act as well. Then my specific point is with regard to the exit to the dissenting shareholders. When we talk about the provisions of Section 27 or Section 13(8) of Companies Act, it talks about giving exit to the shareholders of the companies which have raised funds by way of from the public, but by way of prospectus. There is no clarity whether this exit provisions are applicable to the companies which have raised funds by way of a rights issue or by way of a preferential issue. So if this kind of amendment can be brought in, or the clarity may be brought in, it would be an easy thing for the companies to understand, and there doesn't remain any scope for any non-compliance at a later stage. One thing which I'm observing is when we talk about preferential allotment or a private placement, Act allows us to make allotment to up to 200 people. Of course, this 200 number is emanating from the definition of the public company, but 200 for a preferential allotment or a private placement, as per me, is a big number. So probably from a private placement perspective, this may be curtailed. Then the definition of term securities under the Companies Act, it has been borrowed from the provisions of SEBI Act, but the term warrant is not there. And under the Companies Act, there is no mention of the term share warrants or convertible warrants. Maybe a clarity may be provided by Companies Act, under the Companies Act as well, that warrants can also be issued by way of a fundraising. Likewise, when we talk about deposits, because we are talking about not about capital raising, we are talking about fundraising. So we can even look into the deposits. So if a company has raised any deposits and the deposit holder says that I'm not interested in having redemption of these deposits, or the company is not in a position to redeem those deposits for the reason of poor financial position or any other reasons, then there should be an option of converting these deposits as well into equity shares, the way conversion of loan into equity shares is permitted. These were my few submissions with regard to fundraising. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Anjali. Thank you very much for giving this. Now, next session is incorporation and registration. So Bala is our speaker for Startup Bala. Now, we have seen changes in digital registration, integrated process, no minimum capital requirement, reduced documentation, centralized registry authority, amalgamation of forms, common seal elimination, enhanced compliances. These are the development that's taking place. Now, Bala, tell us what are the missing link? What dil mange more from your side?
Thank you so much, Pawan sir. And I would stick to the timelines, but however, I need to acknowledge this, that out of the 25 speakers, I am the only one who represents small guys in India. So in fact, if you see the August forum, it represents the entire Sensex of India, Tata Steel to Bajaj to Wipro, Mahindra and Mahindra, and Cipla, and so many big organizations who are icons of Indian business. If I have missed any name, it is just a reflection of shortage of time. However, representing smaller organizations, starting up of companies and stuff, I'm humbled that Pawan sir and CP team has given me this opportunity, and I would want to make use of this time. And Anuradha madam is here. I'm sure that she is listening to me. This is a very important stage at which we are. We all know that 10 years have gone by, but this is just a beginning in terms of the change that India is going through. And I have personally grown through this statute, and we have come a very long way. And I would not want to ponder upon the past, but want to reflect upon the future. How is that we as professionals and we as part of this economic segment could contribute to the growth of our organization and the society. And the most important work that CP team and Pawan sir is doing is that they have built a stature and reputation that they can bring in such important contributors to the forum, and they pass on these contributions to the right regulators and the decision makers. And this is a very, very important requirement for any ecosystem to grow and be strengthened. So with this note, I would want to take only 2 minutes in terms of looking at the macro scenario as far as incorporations and registrations are concerned. I know with the complexities with which this August forum deals in, incorporations and registrations might look like a very small thing. However, when we look at international as well as Indian scenario is concerned, India is the second largest entrepreneurial country in the world. That is second only to China. China has 7.7 crore businesses. 77 million. India has 6.5 registered businesses in terms of government's records. So 6.5 crore. And the third is US with 3.3 crore businesses. But the most important element of this is that only 2% of Indian economy is incorporated organization and structured organization. 98% of the economy is under unscalable businesses like proprietary and partnership firms, because of the several reasons which are need to be addressed by the professional as well as the regulators. We'll deal upon those items little later. Now, if you look at US as well as India, US and China, China has 60% of its businesses incorporated. They have started this particular corporatization 15 years before. And US, 95 to 97% of its businesses are incorporated. And in comparison to these two economies, India is only 2%. Look at the gap which is there. If we as an economy want to be scalable, if its businesses are unscalable, how is that the economy can be scalable? That's a question which I want to put across to this forum, one. And we need to answer very specific questions that why we have remained like this and how far we are going to remain like this. So that's the first element. Second element is, this is not a complaining scenario, but this gives us paves us a direction that where we need to lead ourselves. So according to me, as an individual professional who has grown with this thought in my mind that India has to become a corporatized nation, I feel that by end of this decade, we must reach from 2 to at least 20%. And if we have to do that, we have to have 5 times more business setups in India in comparison to what we are. Just one small statistics I want to share is China incorporates 44 lakh companies year on year. This they have been doing for last 7 to 8 years, 44 lakh. And Indian businesses, we are only 2.5 lakh to 3 lakh companies we incorporate on a year-on-year basis. So on a daily basis, China incorporates approximately 12,000 companies and we incorporate around 600 companies. So that's the massive difference which is there. And what is the implication of this is that if we have to have a grown, very matured economy in coming 1 decade, we must have our organizations right from beginning. They have been set in the right direction, which is we have regulatory possibilities for that. This is the act which has brought in 1% companies into for LLPs into corporate entity statuses so that we can eliminate proprietorship forms and partnership forms from our society. However, unfortunately, I would not put the blame on regulators or the governments or anyone as such, but professionals. As professionals, we have not reached out to the economy and told them that why corporatization is very important for the businesses to grow. And there are 2 reasons. One is that this halts the growth of proprietors and partnership firms because 93%, according to KPMG's research, 93% of the educated youth does not want to work for a proprietorship and partnership firm. This is one. Second thing, based upon RBI's recent search, I mean, only 16% of the financial bank lendings goes to unincorporated businesses and 84% of the loan goes for incorporated businesses. So they don't have a growth capital, they don't have an intellectual capital. How is that this 98% of the Indian economy would be able to survive for a long period? And how is that the economy going to become strengthened with this kind of a foundation? So these are the backgrounds for which I'm going to give few suggestions which can help in next coming few years that we could grow this number to a larger extent and the economy could become more strengthened. The first suggestion of mine is that physical verification of registered office address during the incorporation of a company. This particular provision has been there for 10 years. However, even though the intention has been good, but the implication of it is in a negative. The reason is that it forces company secretaries and chartered accountants to travel across cities to do this particular compliance. With today's technological availments, we can entirely eliminate this as well as bring in governance. So what is that we can do to eliminate this is we can bring in GPS coordinates related technological implementations. Second thing is already there is one more authority. I mean, bank account opening does not happen without physical verification. This is the RBI mandate. When that kind of a mandate is there, just by incorporating a company, nobody can do anything without opening a bank account. So multiple duplicacies are being created and professionals are being forced to do this, which they are not capable of doing. Like a city, like any metro city today, you cannot travel from one place to another place without spending half a day of your time. And if we cannot follow these particular compliances, why such kind of compliances need to be kept? That is first thing. And this is the first suggestion. Second thing is, as we know that GST, we could do landmark growth in terms of collection of GST and the kind of implementations that have been done and the appreciation that the government should receive in terms of its implementation in recent past need to be brought in for MCA also. MCA has to provide secured APIs so that automation can be brought in and speeding up of this corporatization of businesses could be enabled. So incorporation and ROC filing needs to be brought under API. I mean, the APIs need to be provided for facilitation of incorporation and ROC so that we reduce the data entry processes which are there. For example, I'll give you one small example, one
Bala, we have to be short because
yes. So
we
so
can
this is the
just
second
give
thing.
suggestion. We can take it.
So third thing is Aadhaar verification instead of digital signature because of its cost element, the kind of time it takes to incorporate the company. So Aadhaar verification is much faster and much secure in relation to DSEs. Third is GST registration. Even though it is not part of this particular act, GST registration nowadays have brought in prior physical verification before allotting a registration of certification to the businesses. Now, this is like indirectly introducing Inspector Raj. I mean, I know that this is a very strong remark. However, young entrepreneurs are put into a lot of hassles and they are at the mercy of the GST officer. This is the fourth element of mine. And fifth is, in terms of incorporation of LLPs, the witnesses are compulsorily to be made by professionals, which need to be removed because we already have similar kind of witness provisions in private limited companies, wherein any individual who is present in front of the subscribers can witness. The similar kind of provision need to be brought under LLP also. And there are a lot of frictions and thought processes which we could implement, but these are my 5 thoughts for future implementations in incorporation. Thank you so much. Sir, your voice, you are muted. You are muted. Pawan sir, you are muted.
Thank you, Vala. Because of shortage of time, we were compelled to do this. Now, regulatory compliance and enforcement. As you are aware that we have a Ankit Singhi, K.S. Ravichandran, Narayan Shankar. All three are well known to us. And we have seen the transformative changes which are taking place in this area: digital compliance filing, single application form, MCA21 platform, centralized registration, robust KYC norms, integrated registration numbers, certificate of annual return, secretarial audit, inspection and investigation power, SFIO. These are the development in last 10 years we have seen. Now, over to you first, Narayan Shankar, because you have talked about the ease of doing business and other thing related to the compliance. So I'll just give you just all 3 speakers, please confine to 5 minutes.
In fact, less than that. Pawan, thanks a ton for inviting me. While my co-panelists will touch upon the points, I just wanted to make 2 or 3 mention about ease of doing business. Because see, if you see off late, there have been a lot of changes in laws introduced by regulators with a restricted timeline of implementation. The regulators should first look at adhering to a silent period where probably like the way corporates have silent period just before financial results, correct? The regulator should adhere to a silent period where no changes in law would be made. A time period of say a quarter or 6 months should be considered by regulators for consolidating and issuing changes in one go. Post this, once you decide that I will do it once in a quarter or once in 6 months, regulators should have a consultative process before assuring any new law. There should be proper advocacy of law much before the declared due date. The advocacy should also come within its ambit, standards and FAQs. This is where professional institutes like ICSI come in to help industry implement the same without every company shelling huge amounts on legal counsels to merely understand how to implement law. The ICSI, for example, has a bandwidth, wherewithal, experience, knowledge, and expertise for setting standards, guidance, and FAQs with relating to regard to any new law, correct? So what will this do? This will enable companies first to be ready in terms of when to expect changes, and more important, what to expect, and you are ready to implement much before the law comes in. So in terms of changes that are going to come and enabling industry to gear up to face the changes, as the dates would be known much more in advance, and the standards and FAQs would also help in proper implementation, resulting in facilitation of ease of doing business. These are just the broad contours I wanted to set before my panelists take over. Thanks a ton, Pawan, again, all the best.
Okay, now KSR, you are the champion of compliance, regulatory and enforcement. What are your views on these subjects?
Number one, we would definitely see this 10-year journey has resulted in at least identifying various provisions and procedures where there is a possibility of clarity being added. For example, 184, 186, I am not elaborating it. And for example, 203, even the proviso in 203 or 203.3. Several such regulatory compliance can be made easy if clarity is added to the provisions. Number two, for example, MGT 14, DAR 12, and MR 1. For the same resolution for appointing a person as managing director, should we have so much of compliance requirements? Number three, there must be a substantial difference between procedural contraventions or delays and deficiencies and substantial contraventions. And regulatory compliance should not be in any way threatening. At the same time, we must achieve balance that it is deterrent. Therefore, there must be an observation separately for procedural as well as substantial. Number four, adjudication. There are a lot of difficulties. Discretionary powers have to be there. Fixed frame of mind must be removed. Adjudication, compounding. There are good number of things which can be done to improve upon. Number five, we are going to say secretarial audit must be strengthened. In view of the current level of experience and the governance programs that are processes that are followed, there must be an enhancement of scope of secretarial audit to the extent of board process evaluation, board performance evaluation, charters, policies, committees evaluation. That will bring a big change in the manner in which today we do the secretarial audit, resulting in an application of mind and focus on improvement of governance and governance improvement measures. And sixth point is 205, functions of company secretary. Today, if you see, company secretary's role has changed to a great extent. 205 requires attention, and probably ICSI and MCA could work to improve the functions of company secretary. The number 7 is the remove the burdensome points. For example, though we had a separate session on CSR, my empirical evidence in my own research shows top 50 companies on an average have spent about 7,860 crore in the last 2 years. And therefore, with 100 or 500 top companies alone, the MCA will be able to achieve the 24,000 crore of spending per annum on CSR. It will be a very important thing. In fact, I have previously shared with the MCA a PPT on what can be done on EODB and how so much of compliance burden could be reduced in this. And the 8th point which I wanted to say is 138 is one section which has been not attended sufficiently. I have already submitted one PPT to MCA on internal audit. What should be the scope? It cannot be the scope of some voucher checking, which is what is happening in companies. We know that. Therefore, there must be an expansion towards overall governance visualization in the internal audit. The last point I am saying, Mr. Pawan, for this beautiful opportunity is look at provisions which are so important, like duties of directors and 166. Previously, we had the common law and fiduciary duties enshrined into the statute book, like what other countries, UK, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand have done. But that is a provision where there is no penal provision also. So therefore, these are all the 9 things I would like to submit, but to slightly elaborate it, I will send it across to you for your consideration and compilation. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity, and may God bless you for several hundreds of such programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, KSR. Very shortly, you have given the maximum suggestion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ankit.
Thank you,
Follow
you, sir.
KSR path now.
I'll touch upon some of the aspects which KSR are mentioned. I think first is in terms of the duplication of filings. I think that is something which definitely MC needs to look into in terms of ease of compliances, because there are a lot of events under the Companies Act where there is a duplication or dual filing, and even in a lot of places there are still which are filings or processes are taking place in terms of a physical mode, like for example merger of capital of authorized capital in case of a scheme. we need to submit an application, and then that application is processed. And if the application is not, you didn't submit an application along with the form IC28, for getting it done, you have to submit a separate application. So these e-filing, I think there is a need to relook into in these e-filings in order to avoid duplication of process where there are multiple filings are required for same purpose. I think that can be one area which needs to be looked into. And another is in terms of certain processes which are still are undergoing on a physical manner. If these both the things can be looked into, a lot of compliance efforts can be reduced. Secondly, I would like to also bring to the knowledge of all the to the fore of all the panelists is an important topic where we would like to have a different set of framework for small companies. So like when MC introduced the concept of small companies, they've gradually expanded the scope, and now a larger ambit of companies which are registered in India are falling under the criteria of small companies. But still, in terms of the regulatory regime, if you see in terms of the compliances, there are still a lot of differences in terms of compliances which a small company is required to do vis-a-vis another company which is not a small company. If you see SEBI, while introducing all major amendments, generally always use a glide path, and where they always tend to introduce important compliances on companies which are big, which can very well undertake those compliances. And then slowly and slowly, based out of the experience of those big bahumats, big listed entities, then they introduce a glide path of taking them forward to different set of companies. I think similarly, it's time where MCA needs to look into from the compliances as to the size and operations of the company when they are outlining the compliance regime for any entity, whether it's private company, whether it's a public. We need to see the size and operations. All the companies cannot be akin to same set of compliances when they are at a different level of operations. A small company, for example, a startup who is just begin, and considering the huge number of startups that we have in country and the number of startups that are going to incorporate in next a decade will be outbeating all the numbers that have been there since last decade. I think it's very important for us to build a compliance regime that is very friendly for listed and for startups when they are in the phases of their growth, in their early phases of their life, and then grow gradually as they attain a size basis the number, basis the turnover, net worth, or even exposure to public money in form of debt. Then we should introduce a higher level of compliances. Like for Schedule 3, the disclosures that are required for a small company, for a company which is a small, or another company which is a big, all are the same, except few things. Why we need to publish everything when the nature of operations are completely different, the size of operations are different? So therefore, I think there is a need to specifically nurture the concept of small company, to bring a new regulatory regime for small companies, enabling them to grow by bringing use of compliance. And once they attain a set of certain size of nature of operations, or once they get exposed to public in terms of more investors coming in, more debt coming in, then we should have bring them into a different level of compliance, which is important considering the exposure of both public money and investors and banks in case their debts is involved. Third important point is with respect to the compounding and adjudication mechanism. If you see under SEBI, there is also a concerned mechanism which is similar to compounding. But what they have done, they have outlined a matrix in terms of ascertaining the amount that one is liable to pay if he or she decides, or the company decides, to file for a settlement or consent application. Similarly, compounding provisions are there in Companies Act. It was there in the earlier Companies Act. There can be a similar mechanism which can be brought for different sections, or different way of understanding how one can get an offense compounded. And I think it would be easier for both the adjudicating authority and for the companies to decide and to go for compounding in a much frequent manner where they feel that at times certain inadvertent compliances have taken place. Similarly, in case of pen adjudication, also penalty, there are, at some cases, there are minimum penalties too high. So we still need to rationalize those amount of penalties, and a lot of regulators like ROCs are putting at least the minimum penalty in most of the cases where the penal adjudication is being done. that also needs to be looked into, because it otherwise demotivate a person for filing an adjudication application unless and until it is at suo motu at the end of the ROC. Similarly, in both compounding and adjudication, there is the ministry MCA 21's version 3 website has a mechanism for e-adjudication. But I don't think still that has been resorted to a large extent, where there can be a e-adjudication mechanism or e-compounding mechanism where everything can be done through VCs and in a very short period of time. Then that can also help in reducing or enforcing the compliances to a large extent. Similarly, for enforcing compliances on part of ROC, I think there are a lot of compliances they can check from the filings itself. So once a filing is triggered, the non-compliance can trigger at that same point of time basis the information filed. That can also help in executing or undertaking adjudicating action fast, because more and more enforcement action will result in more and more compliance, and gradually the compliance will become to such a level that there would be further need of any adjudicating applications or even compounding. So I think considering the data that MCA is sitting on the portal that they have, it is very important for them to bring both e-adjudication, e-compounding along with auto-driven notices of penal adjudication to ensure that compliances are taken seriously, and in intermittent cases you can have always the hearing to present your case and then take that forward. I think these are some of the things which I foresee can help in better regulatory compliance and also in enforcement.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ankit, KSR and Narayan Shankar. Very briefly you have touched upon. Now over to the next session. The next session is a merger and amalgamation, and we have Manoj Kumar and Rajiv Chaube, and we have seen these are the development has taken place, process shifted from High Court to Tribunal, fast track merger, demerger, cross-border merger allowed, but it has to take shape, and uniformity in practices before all NCLT branches, they are doing efforts. Now, what more we have to do? Over to you, Rajiv. You please tell us.
Thanks, Pawanji, for the opportunity, and it's really, I think everybody is in one voice that it is a great initiative. Coming straight to the point, I think the first desirable change which we look into is in terms of expedited regulatory approvals, because as you may be aware that any acquisition or any merger also triggers approval under the Competition Act. The approval of CCI is required. Although the latest amendment in the Competition Act has reduced the timeline from 210 days to 150 days. So that also effectively is 5 months. Looking at the business scenario where a deal has to be done in a definitive time frame, and it is not only CCI, there are other approvals which are required. I think if the ministry can further reduce the timeline even from 150 days to maximum around 60 days, that will be great. And I think one way to achieve this will be to have a mandatory pre-consultation, so that there are no issues in terms of filing the form and then there are queries back and forth. The second issue which I would like to touch upon is that currently NCLT is having jurisdiction not only for Companies Act but also for Competition Act and also for IBC. Unfortunately, IBC, because of the strict time frame, has taken a priority, and NCLT is mostly busy with IBC cases, and a result of that, what has happened is that matters under the mergers and amalgamation, which is again requires a very strict time frame, because, so that goes into the back burner. And there is, in fact, there was a news item in the Mint which was reported last year that there are almost 21,000 cases pending. And out of that, almost 1,200 cases relating to mergers and amalgamation has been pending for quite some time. Although I understand recently Ministry has appointed a lot of new NCLT members, which is a welcome move. But in my view, there has to be a dedicated bench of NCLT only to look after mergers and amalgamation and matters relating to Companies Act, whereas benches for IBC can be separate. So I think this is very, very important, because if we have to grow
if you're looking India as the third largest economy and an economy of 5 trillion and ultimately aiming to 10 trillion, I think a lot of M&A will take place. And we need, and to attract investment into the country, I think in part of ease of doing business, I think NCLT approval has to be expedited. So I think these are the 2 points from my side, and I will request my co-speaker Manoj to take on the other points, looking at the limitation of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv ji. You have touched upon very important aspect of merger amalgamation. So I believe that the merger amalgamation provisions of Companies Act is quite comprehensive. It requires certain modifications or certain changes which are procedural in nature. So let's say to fast track it, the provision of fast track merger has come, but it is still not evolved fully. The limit of a small company has been enhanced to 4 crore rupees better capital and 40 crore rupees turnover. But still, and a significant number of companies are now covered under that threshold. Still, very few cases are being filed at RD level, and most of the cases are going to NCLT. So that need to be changed. Situation that would improve the timeline, because NCLT burden would get reduced drastically. One change may be required in fast track merger regime. That is the requirement of approval from the 90% of the number of shareholders, which is at present. It may be changed to 90% in value, which is quite substantial. And I think that may help in reducing the timeline. Then another thing is relating to approval or dispensation of meeting of shareholders. The Act provides for dispensation of meeting of creditors, but not for the shareholders. And NCLT benches practice differently. In some NCLT benches allow dispensation of meeting of shareholders if 90% consents are there, but many of the benches are not allowing that, which increases the timeline by 2-3 months drastically if one meeting of shareholder is required. So that removing or making that clarity in the law would help to enhance the time, reduce the timeline by 2-3 months. So that can be done. Then we have seen that the various regulators whose no objection is required to approve the scheme have different practices. So these regulations need to have a standard operating process, and they must give their comment, whether positive or negative or whatever objection they have, within the time frame given, that is 30 days under the Act. So that should be enforced fully so that the timeline reduces. Then there is a requirement of valuation. The valuation related provision has come under the Companies Act, Section 247, but there is no standard valuation standards. Still, it is not yet evolved, and there have been situations where the regulators as well as the NCLT sometimes ask what are the reasons, what should be the valuation date, whether it should be the same date as the appointed date. These kind of issues sometimes drag the process. So if the valuation standards comes, then it will get fast tracked. So I think these are a few changes which in addition to having dedicated bench at NCLT would enhance the timeline and improve the process. I think these are the important aspects. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoj and Raji. Because of shortage of time, we have to rush. Now, There's a corporate dispute resolution. Okay, now we have Mr. P. Nagesh with us. He's a senior advocate, Supreme Court and High Court. And we have seen these changes in last 10 years. NCLT formation, IBC, alternative dispute resolution, class action suit, decriminalization offense, e-adjudication. These things has taken place, but some of the things has to take further shape. So over to you, Nagesh, for your part to cover the corporate dispute resolution. Over to you.
Thank you, Pawan. Good evening, all the panelists. And today it's been a very hectic day, I think, for most of these speakers, and we are almost at the cricket match. Anyway, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. See, I would limit my observations to the practice that is taking place in the NCLT insofar as the corporate dispute resolutions are concerned. See, the commencement of and the establishment of national company law tribunals has been one of the best things that can happen under the Companies Act, no doubt about it. And as the previous speakers have mentioned, there has to be a dedicated bench to specifically hear the company related matters. And in fact, we persuaded in Delhi, I don't know about other benches, we persuaded the president of the NCLT to dedicate one particular day to hear only company matters. So at least the matters relating to the Companies Act, mergers, amalgamations, and operation mismanagement can be taken care of. Having said that, there are issues relating to Section 230 because of the variance in many of the benches. So, as Manoj was pointing out, I think the Act itself or the rules should themselves speak about various issues that are being faced by the litigants. See, for example, we cannot have a rule for dispensation in one court to be different from the one in another court. So, therefore, there has to be these regulations and rules specifically dealing with all the issues in one place, so that when somebody is filing a petition, he knows how to present a petition without any delay from the benches. That's one thing which I'm thinking in terms of improvement in the Companies Act and for the Section 230. Now coming to the other aspect, most of the disputes are by the shareholders. At least we find most of the matters are coming in respect of the operation mismanagement. There, I think what is really making many of the matters delayed is the issue of waiver under Section 244. I think waiver is something which, though they have said that if you have less than 10%, you have to move an application for waiver. My experience has been that this waiver application is also most of the time getting delayed for not being able to understand the concept of waiver under the Companies Act. Because if you remember earlier, even if a member or a shareholder was having more than 10% and he was diluted and he is brought down to less than 10%, the Company Law Board was saying that because you are complaining the act of being reduced as an act of operation, it's not necessary that you should have 10%. Unfortunately, here the language used in 244 is very clear. It says where any member. So even if his shareholding is brought, say, nil, then he has to move an application under 5859 to get himself first registered as a member and then file a petition under Section 241, 242. So this is something which I think we need to, going forward, we need to have this specifically incorporated, saying that even if you are brought down, waiver application can be decided in your favor. So that's one important aspect, I think, which is causing much delay. Another important aspect which I find in the present Companies Act is, in the 1956 Act, we did not have past and concluded transactions to be a ground for challenge. And in this case, I think moving forward, I think 2013 Act rightly mentioned that even if a particular instance or the acts of operation mismanagement have been conducted means you can even challenge the past and concluded transaction. There is one good thing that has happened in the present 2013 Act. Way forward, I think what I would rather require is, today, the startup companies are there. There are many companies where the people actually, the persons who are coming together to form a company do not know what exactly the word, the meaning of word operation, because operation is not defined under the Companies Act. It is only the judgments, interpretation of the word operation by meaning to say that, listen, it should be harsh and burdensome. But there may not be many acts which are so harsh and burdensome which may lead to a case of winding up. If that is the case, no case of operation mismanagement can be decided. So in my suggestion, one of the suggestions I would like to emphasize is, at least an element of prejudice can be introduced in the Act. For example, when they say that if a particular shareholder is prejudiced and that prejudice is objectionable, it's an objectionable conduct, I think that should be one of the grounds, apart from the grounds of oppressive behavior of the, the majority shareholders, where minority shareholders say that, listen, the acts of the majority shareholders are prejudicial to my interest and therefore you should have a ground for challenge. So I think that should be one of the grounds I think should be introduced. And then finally, why should only a shareholder or a creditor, only a stakeholder? Why can't any other person who has some interest in the company be able to exercise the right under the Act? That also needs to be understood. we can't simply allow only the stakeholders. There could be somebody, there could be many others who have some interest in the company who have to come and exercise their right under the Act. I think this should also one of the suggestions which I would like to mention here. And then I don't think the Companies Act has addressed fairly about the fraudulent conduct by the companies. I think the fraudulent conduct of the companies should be a ground for operational mismanagement that should be immediately brought into it, because many of the fraudulent acts cannot be stated that if there's any fraud, you go to the under the Indian Penal Code. But the Companies Act also should provide for that redressal mechanism. That's one thing. And finally, I think we have to modernize. I think the what do we call it? The Section 231. There's no point wasting so much time in the court for a merger and amalgamation. We have to modernize. I think there has to be somebody like if the matter is before the regional director, he should have an adjudicating activity through electronic mode. I think it's high time we should have the electronic mode where people sitting from their offices, the RD having a VC facility, just hear the matter and finish it. There's no point all the way going to the RD's office and getting a matters of operational mismanagement, the mergers and amalgamation decided by him. So this is one thing we should also modernize. I think these are the few points. I think I don't, because we need a larger seminar to
we are running out of time, but if you can give me just 30 seconds, I just wanted to raise one point on corporate dispute resolution with Mr. Nagesh. I think, sir, under the new Companies Act, there is a definition, there is a provision that the jurisdiction of civil court has been debarred. But correct. I think, but still there are a lot of disputes where people are going to the court, civil court, to exercise their rights. I think the Act should be amended to very clearly provide that what all can be, contested before NCLT and what cannot be, contested. I think that should be also.
I just add one line in that. See, fortunately for us, we have one judgment of Justice Sanjeev Khanna by the name Vidya Drolia. So what has happened was company matters were also sought to be taken in arbitration matters. So he specifically gave a finding saying that, listen, arbitration matters are those matters which are covered by contract and commercial dispute. So any matter relating to the company can be addressed only by the company law board or the NCLT. You cannot invoke the jurisdiction of the arbitration. Taking a cue from there, I think we should specifically, the Act should specifically mention that these are the acts which are squarely
under the
should be dealt by the NCLT and not by the civil courts.
Okay.
That's what we should do. And thank you, Pawan, for giving me this opportunity. We will have some more time in a bigger forum which we can address some more issues. Thank you.
Nagesh, we will, because this is the program where we can divide on all these topics separately and discuss threadbare what developments have taken place. Okay, friends. Now,
thank you.
Last session, binding up of strike off. Always Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. So Mahesh has to come at last to close it. So now over to Amit.
Most important person.
Yeah, winding up and strike off. And we have seen the changes. Center for Processing CPS, liquidation appointment, liquidator appointment, creditors committee, protection of interest, pre-packed insolvency, cross-border insolvency, fast-track liquidation. All these things we have seen. Now over to you, Amit. What is in your pitara? So for the ministry
Thank you, Pawan sir, for giving this wonderful opportunity. As you described, the last man has come. So is the fate of the business closure in the country also, in the mind of the regulator also, and so is the reason why it is at this stage. That is the reason. So because the least attention has been paid ever always by the government to the business closure. Business incorporation has been the area of interest for the regulators time and always. And when it comes to closure, the businesses, houses are also becoming little more sentimental, and even the regulator also very sentimental, and they does not talk much about. Although there was a lot of reforms done by way of Companies Act 2013, by way of, if I can just highlight couple of the points which were landmark. Like if you remember, the provision of strike off, which is now 248. If you remember, in earlier era, 560 was there, but it was a power available only with the registrar. No suo motu application can be filed. It was only by way of time to time schemes were announced. Simplified exit scheme was coming, fast track exit scheme was coming. So whenever a scheme was coming, then only you were able to file the strike off application. Otherwise, you were not allowed. So Companies Act that way came as a blessing, that it provided a permanent provision that companies can suo motu file the strike off application. I think major reform was done by way of Companies Act 2013. Second, the major reform came by way of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, by which the compulsory liquidation was stopped, which was converted to a compulsory resolution unless and until the possibility of business resolution was explored. And if it was concluded that there is no resolution possible, you cannot go ahead with the closure. Like earlier 433 provision was there, any creditor amount due, you file the application and the winding up will start. Maybe it will conclude or not, that's a different story, but the creditor will put you to the task that your company starts with the winding up. Now the process has undergone a change. Now, a lot of changes have taken place. Voluntary liquidation has started. Now, all good things are known to everybody now in the last 10 years of time. Now, let us understand what has been not dealt with and what is the 5 most urgent things which are required. As I was mentioning, our Prime Minister is very conscious of ease of doing business ranking of India. And since last 10 years, I think it has jumped significantly in the ease of doing business ranking, and primarily because we could legislate and integrate our business registration laws in such a manner that now you get registration certificate, your PAN number, your TAN number, your bank account, your EPFO, your ESIC, everything with the incorporation certificate. Lot of integration has taken place. Unfortunately, such kind of integration is not there in the business closure. The result is that if I file an application even simply for strike off, there is no guarantee that I will be successful in closure unless and until I have a clearance from all other departments. If my PF dues are outstanding, if I don't have a clearance from them, I will be stuck. If my litigations are not closed, I will be stuck. I will not be able to close my application. More often, this problem is visible in the case of dissolutions, in the case of liquidation application, where if you see, there were approximately 4,500 applications which were pending on 1st of April 2014, when this new law was implemented exactly 10 years back. As of now, also the number has not been very encouraging, so that we can say that we have done any big achievement. The one reason I could see, if I have done a lot of research on the data crunching, and I can say with conviction, the reason is only one, that everybody is facing some or other litigation in other court, other than the NCLT. The dissolution process, the liquidation process is now carried out by the National Company Law Tribunal. But other than National Company Law Tribunal, the matters are pending before Civil Court, before District Court, before Consumer Court, before High Court, before Supreme Court. Sorry. So these are the reasons due to which we are not able to close the liquidation matters. Similarly, the matters are pending with PF office, with ESI office, with GST office, with income tax office, with labor office. Why not Government of India comes out with integrated policy, as and when the company is deciding for closure, single intimation will go to all the departments that this company is filing an application for closure. You dispose of their application on the fast track mode so that they can dissolve it early. Once this approach is there, I'm sure this process will be cut down very significantly. This was a point number one, that integrated approach is required. Secondly, to deal with the legal cases, what could be the solution? Now, as soon as CIRP process commences, the commencement of new proceedings is stopped. However, as soon as liquidation process starts, whatever pending cases were there on the commencement of CIRP, they can be resumed. Now, there comes a problem. As soon as these processes commences, again resume, then there is no end to it. They may conclude in 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, 20 year. Until they are concluded, you cannot close your liquidation process. My single suggestion, I think we had discussed with IBBI also in the past, the suggestion is that no proceeding or suit can continue except with the leave of the National Company Law Tribunal. What will happen? This will not change much, but at least the NCLT will become monitoring agency for whatever matters are going on in the different court. So the other matters will be in the supervision of the NCLT, and no matter can continue forever without any instructions and without of the checking. So they will not remain unchecked. That is the point number 2. Point number 3, even if a company decides, if I decide to start a company and tomorrow I have a disharmony with my co-promoter, I cannot go for closure, even with the strike off, which is the easiest option, because I'll have to compulsorily wait for 2 years that I have not done business. I have done business for 10 days. After that, I stopped. Now I have to wait for 2 long years to satisfy the condition of 248 just to close the company. This is the situation. Then I'm sure the business community is not going to be very happy in compliance of law. So this is third suggestion. Fourth suggestion, which has already been implemented by the government of India. I salute to the people who have evolved that kind of law by way of section 361, which is a carve out of section 271A, winding up proceeding. That is the only winding up proceeding which is available in the Companies Act now. That is on the just and equitable ground or on the passing of a special resolution. So what if a company is today not solvent? If a company is solvent, then you can go for 59 voluntary winding up. If a company is not solvent, I can invoke 271A. But there is another option, because 271A is a NCLT option. Government of India has brought in a very exciting scheme for a small company, that if you are meeting certain criteria, then you need not go to NCLT. You can simply do a summary proceeding with the regional director. And what are the criteria? Criteria is that your book value should not exceed 1 crore, your capital should not exceed 1 crore, deposit should not be more than 25 lakhs. So very brief criteria. If you are a small company, you can fit into that jacket very easily. So you simply file the application to RD, they will appoint the liquidator, and your proceedings will get completed in a 60 days of time. So this process needs to be educated. I have not heard any single order passed under section 361. Why this is not being populated? I think that is popularized. That is one of my concern, and the government of India and we professional. Also, I'll request Pawan sir to organize one program on that specifically so that we can make a popularization of that particular program. And last but not the least, the charge creation registration mechanism need to be centralized. Now today, registrar of company is 1, charge registration agency, CERSAI is 2, Then information utility under insolvency and bankruptcy code is 3. Now, all these 3 agencies, although have a different purpose, but cannot they be brought in one single umbrella and one single registration or single information can suffice for all the regulator? This will reduce the litigation when the liquidator has to distribute the properties and settle the claims. These are all my 5 suggestions. Thank you so much for all my learnings, sharing whatever I could share in this short period of time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amit. And you were the last batsman and you have polished 6. Thank you very much. Friends, as you are aware that this is we have already overshooted 15 minutes. So there's a time to close this session. I'm very grateful to all the panelists who has no doubt it is a program which we have done on the basis of the suggestions we wanted to receive. Madam has discussed with me yesterday also that whatever your suggestions and whatever the panelist suggestions are there, let's compile it, give it to them, and they are saying that we are in the process of implementing and discussing each and everything. In her inaugural speech, you have seen that changing face of regulator and government, that they are more inclined to discuss today and they want to come out some solution, because ease of doing business is one aspect which we have to do. And no doubt the various speakers have suggested use of technology, use of the model which can help. I'm grateful to each and everyone, those who have participated, gave their time and have given the good suggestions to all of us. And I'm assuring you what is our target now, compiling all these information, all these suggestions, send it back to all the panelists of the different topics. And simultaneously, I will request all the panelists, you have given suggestion on the basis of one topic, but you must be having suggestion on another topic. So please send it to us. We will all compile and within a week, we will share with you and then submit to the ministry with the mentioning names of all the panelists, those who have participated today. It is a no doubt CP was the coordinator of this program, but you all have added value to this. We have created a body, but you have given the heart, soul and life in this. So we want to take advantage of this. Second is, we are planning to come out with a compendium of articles like which IBC has come out. And this is one good book where they have given the articles. So we will send you the draft article. You please add value, correct it, and then give it to us. So we will launch this, and we will request ministry that they should. We all will go one day, and they will request them to launch this book. Third is survey we have given. The number of survey today also we have received more people have participated. You also give your fill your survey, and accordingly after the subjective number is there, we will make it and publish in the media also as well as with the government also. So it can have the larger people's suggestions. So with these things, I thanks all of you, and I want to inform you that our journey will continue. And today just now Anjali came, that she told me that 11th is the day when the ICDR has completed 5 years. So let's do the program on ICDR 5 years. So I thought, yes, this is also one way to wake up the regulator as well as the professional. So this is one way to get up and give all suggestions, compile it and give it to. So thank you very much to all. Thank you. Thank you.